Good afternoon. Committee will come to order. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Subcommittee's second public witness hearing. This afternoon, the Subcommittee will be hearing from a cross-section of individuals representing a wide variety of issues addressed by this Subcommittee. Chair will call each panel of witnesses to the table, one panel at a time. Each witness will be provided up to 5 minutes to present their testimony. We'll be using a timer to track the progress of each witness, and then the button turns yellow. The witness will have 1 minute remaining to conclude his or her remarks. And if you want to speak less, that's great with me and the rest of the panel. Members will have an opportunity to ask questions to the witnesses, but in the interest of time, the Chair requests that we try to keep things moving to stay on schedule. Chair reminds those in the hearing room that the committee rules prohibit the use of outside cameras, audio equipment during these hearings. Any use of cameras, recording devices, or audio equipment must be credentialed through one of the House press galleries. I'm happy now to yield to my friend, Ms. McCollum, for any remarks you may wish to make.
Mr. Chair, it's a pleasure to be here, and I thank the public for coming and letting us know what's on their mind. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm happy to introduce the full committee chairman, Mr. Rogers, who's going to introduce a constituent and good friend.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that courtesy. And I am greatly honored to introduce to you one of my constituents from the 5th District in Kentucky, Mr. Charles Baird. Mr. Baird serves as the chairman of Coal Operators and Associates, a position he's held since 1987. Coal Operators and Associates represents 39 mine operators and 137 entities that provide goods and services to the mining industry all throughout Central Appalachia. Mr. Baird and those he represents have experienced the war on coal firsthand, and he understands better than most of us the challenges that coal producers in Appalachia are facing today. I'm grateful that he has taken the time to speak to this subcommittee. Over the last several years, the administration has engaged in a targeted dismantling of the coal industry in Appalachia. In eastern Kentucky, where I serve, we've lost nearly 9,000 coal jobs since the president took office. These are good jobs, paying on average $60,000 a year from the start, enough to keep the lights on and to support a family and make plans for the future. But now the jobs that have provided people in coal country with stability and security for 200 years are disappearing all around us. A deluge of regulatory requirements from Washington is imposing tremendous expenses on coal operators. Large and small mining companies alike are being forced to choose between passing these costs along to their consumers and closing up shop, all in the name of a single-minded agenda. Hard-working Americans in my district who are willing to work day in and day out to provide this country and the world with cheap, reliable energy from coal are being pointed toward the unemployment line by this administration. Despite the administration's wrong-headed agenda, the fact remains: coal is the cheapest, most reliable source of energy, and this country needs it in order to keep the lights on. Without it, energy prices will rise and we'll continue to face outages, brownouts, blackouts every time a major cold front or storm hits. I'm proud of this hard-working spirit that resides in my district and that Mr. Baird represents. I'm encouraged by their desire to provide this country with an energy source that keeps food on the table, utility bills low, and energy independence attainable. I know this committee will continue to support them in these shared goals. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to introduce Mr. Baird to this subcommittee.
Welcome, Mr. Baird. Recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
I'm sure you know, Ranking Member McCollum, that not too long ago you had 46 coal-fired plants in Minnesota that was providing nearly 44% of your electricity in your state. Kentucky's over nearly 95% or even greater than that. Electricity is provided by coal. EPA, in my opinion, is on a mission to eliminate coal mining and also generation of electricity by coal. They want to take coal out of the energy mix based on premises that we believe have been proven wrong. EPA has funded a one-sided analysis of global warming. Actually, after the term global warming kind of became an old hat, they changed it to climate change. And they've told us of the great calamities and the destruction that's going to occur if we don't change. We believe that the EPA has really created this crisis. It's a self-created crisis. It's really not a crisis. These very same alarmists that are telling us now in 2015 were the very same people that were saying these same things in the 1980s. If you took these same folks, took their analysis they made in the early 1980s and put them on a chalkboard, which we don't use anymore, but I think you can put them on a chalkboard and list them 1 through 20 and see which ones have come true and which ones haven't come true, I think you'd find that none of them have come true. And those are the same folks that EPA is relying on today for this agenda that they've determined. We were supposed to have great increases in global temperatures. That hasn't occurred. By now, they said, the models said that we were supposed to have 1 or 2 feet water rising on the coast of the country. That hasn't occurred. EPA and other agencies has funded billions and billions of dollars to what I call the environmental advocacy industry. And that's exactly what it is. It's a industry that they have fermented and vegetated and fertilized, you might say, and it's grown exponentially. I think one of the first things this committee and Congress needs to do is determine how much money is actually being funneled to these groups and to whom it's going, what their assignment is, and what the results are. And then we need to analyze those results. They need to be critiqued, and yes, they need to be debated. The environmental advocacy industry doesn't want this debate. They have insulted anyone who questions the validity. But yet, if this committee wrote EPA today a letter and asked them 10 questions about their determinations, if you go on their website, they got a pretty website. It's got all kinds of determinations that they've made of possibilities and maybes and we thinks. Ask them the question. They can't give you an answer. They won't give you an answer. They won't give you an answer of how they arrived at that opinion. So that would be one of the first things I would request that the Congress do is ask the questions, see what basis they're relying on to come up with these things. I think you'll find that you're really, like the rest of us, you're somewhat helpless because EPA thinks that they are in control. It's amazing how an agency in the federal government can really take over our country with these great amounts of thousands and thousands of new pages of regulations since this administration came in. Regulations that have changed the interpretation that existed for 30 or 40 years, all to our detriment. You may have heard the other day that, they're now working on charcoal grills or working on the water coming out of the hotel and the shower to control that, put sensors on them. That, next thing we're going to do, we'll have sensors on our own private baths about how much water we can run in our bathtub. But they've come up, all this agenda they've had has put thousands and thousands of people out of work. They're demolishing and mothballing hundreds of these power plants, and that's their goal. One of the main points is the grid. People don't realize that the polar vortex of last year, that the whole East Coast, the grid on the entire East Coast came within minutes of going down. In other words, the entire East Coast would have been without electricity. If you don't believe that, get some of your staff to ask the electric industry if that's not in fact what happened. If we'd have had the same thing this year, we would have been in a world of hurt because at that time, the only thing that saved us was the coal generation facilities. They were at 90% of capacity. This year, there's a dozen, 2 dozen of those facilities are now offline. So they're not there to help. So we're asking that the Congress do several things. Continue to ask hard questions. Verify. Don't deny. The verification will result in a denial. Fund studies, fund independent studies. Challenge the challenge the results, it's certainly worth the cost. Because the biggest thing that's happening is the tremendous increase in cost that this is going to cause to the American people. And the people fear for their jobs. They fear for the ability to be able to clothe, feed, and educate their families. And it's not only in the coal industry, it's everywhere. You know, Mr. Chairman, I think you're from California. You know, you don't have to go too far from where you live in the San Joaquin Valley to see all the tens of thousands of farmers that have been put out of job because of the EPA. You know, when you go to the grocery store, you look where your fruit's coming from now. You know, you got Nicaragua, you got Mexico, you got everything, but, you know, they're the San Joaquin Valley. It's the breadbasket of Kentucky, breadbasket of California. But for some reason, those people can't work, and we're importing a lot of our fruits and vegetables now as a result of EPA's action. So it's not just control, it's everywhere. I got one other little point I'd like to make. The costs are exponential, what they're doing, all the MATs, the clean power legislation. This is something that came out today. This is a request for a proposal. EPA has proposed that people apply for a grant of $48 million. And the purpose of this grant is to help those that are regulating to teach them how to deal with the increased cost of regulation. $48 million to pay a consultant to teach the affected industries how to comply, how to handle the increase in cost. That's $80,000 a pop. That's 600 people, and I, you know, if that, what a waste. But you know, I would hope some of our 9,000 direct jobs in the coal mining industry, some of these people might be able to get that type of job. But there's many tens of thousands of more that have lost their jobs. And these young men here next to me, I think, can better say that. But we appreciate your help, and I know your efforts you're making on our behalf.
I know your region's going through a lot of pain, sir. Mr. Rogers, Mr. Chairman, you have any questions you'd like to ask? I know you had to.
Thank Mr. Baird for being here. He's a consistent fighter on this issue, knows it as better than anybody that I'm aware of. And he's a fighter for the cause day in and day out over the years. And I thank you, Mr. Baird, for that work.
Thank you for what you do also.
Thank you. Next, we're going to have Mr. Jordan Bridges and Mr. Doug Keelan. Mr. Bridges, you're a drill operator, and Mr. Keelan, you're a former blaster, as I put down here. So you're recognized, Jordan, for your opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman Calvin, and ranking members of this subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity for me to speak here. This testimony is intended to discuss the Environmental Protection Agency and the administration's abuse of the rules set in place. I'm testifying about the devastating effects that the EPA's regulatory overreach against the coal industry is having on my family, my friends, and my co-workers. The EPA, to me, has no regard for the consequences of its own regulatory regulations and the effects that it has on the economy. There are thousands of people who have lost their jobs, and there are no other jobs in our area to fill the need. I mean, there's people laid off, and there's no other jobs for them to get. These are hard-working people that we're losing our homes, we're losing the ability to provide for our families, and it's our livelihood. This agency's regulations are forcing people to relocate and infringing upon our rights as American citizens to choose a place to where we want to live and work. When the jobs are there, they're just taking it from us. The downfall of the coal industry not only affects us coal miners, but there's other jobs and companies as well that are affected because of this. They exist because of us. They manufacture supplies, parts, equipment, just specifically for our industry, and they're all suffering. I have many friends or families own machine shops, as we call them. They are worried about their jobs. At this rate, there's not going to be nothing left, at least in southern West Virginia, Kentucky, parts of Pennsylvania. I mean, coal is the life source there. Retraining has not been offered to us directly. There's nobody come out and said we're going to retrain you for a certain position, as the EPA has stated before. How are you supposed to do that and support families during the process of being retrained? If I go to have retraining, I'm going to lose everything that I've worked for because there's nobody to pay my bills. They have not accounted also for the unemployment. I think that the statistics are wrong on that as far as unemployment numbers. Once you receive all the benefits that you can receive, you drop off the radar. You are no longer counted on unemployment as a statistic on there. So there's the actual unemployment rate, to my knowledge, is higher because there's other people that fell off the job market, no longer able to find a job and can't find a job, so they have nowhere to turn but to lose everything they have, maybe ask for a parent or somebody to help them, grandparents. There's many men and women that have spent the majority of their lives in this industry, and they're at the retirement age of 55. And they're unable to retire. How are they able to restart their life over? I mean, they're not able to. I mean, all they know is coal mining, deep mining, underground, or surface, what have you, anything to do with it. They're at the retirement age, but they can't afford to retire. You cannot retrain somebody that's been in that industry for 40-some years to do another job, to make a living. And I don't think they should have to. I mean, the jobs are there, and they just need to be able to work. Safety is a priority for the industry. We strive to be as environmentally friendly as possible. There has to be a balance. It's a balance between doing what's best for the environment and best for us. You cannot expect families to suffer and to go without food and shelter and supplies to save a goldfish or a tree. I mean, to me, that my life, my daughter over here, my wife, and my future baby is more important than any tree or fish in the water. I don't care. I mean, we're not hurting them, but that's more important to me. And I think that should be noted as far as that's concerned. Strip mining is repeatedly attacked as being an eyesore, as being destructive and cruel. But the fact is, once mining is done, the land can be used for many different things. We plant trees, we plant grass. The land can be used for schools, which it has been. Mingo County Central High School is on a reclaimed surface mine. You can use them for factories. We have a wood factory up on 22 Mine Road in Logan County. Orchards, we have apple trees up on certain jobs. There's just deer flourish up there. They run around. It's amazing. We got cattle up on there. The United States Air Force training facility is also relocated on a reclaimed surface mine in Logan County, West Virginia. Y'all ought to check that out. Or we can just put it back the way it was. The EPA don't want us to do that, and they're fighting against us. But while they continue to make assumptions from behind a desk, I invite you and everybody else in the Congress to come see it for yourself. If you want to come see the effects that the surface mine has, you just come see it for yourself. I'll be glad to show you around. And you can't see it from behind the desk, and the EPA can make anything sound good on paper, but until you come see the families that are hurting in southern West Virginia, I think it's something that needs to be really considered when they make these regulations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Bridges. Is it Keelan? Keelan, thank you. You recognize me.
Thank you, Chairman Calvert and Ranking Member McCollum, and members of this subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity. My name's Doug Killen. I'm the father of 7, me and my wife. We have 3 children of our own. We've 2 adopted, and then we've got 2 other foster children. We care about a lot of the kids. One of the things that we're also here today to speak about the Environmental Protection Agency and its war on coal. I'm employed at Hobet Mining in West Virginia. At that mine alone, we've lost 150 men and women since 2005. And it's all because of the EPA and their regulatory overreach. The EPA has always downplayed their impact their actions have on jobs, but if they'd come to West Virginia, they'd just see how much we're suffering due to their actions. In West Virginia alone, 2,500 surface miners have lost their jobs since 2005. Our state can't absorb those jobs. We as miners have fought many struggles and through many adversities. We are a tough breed. We are proud of our work and our traditions. Our fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers have all been miners in West Virginia. We have went from spending scrip at the company store, living as rats, to we have now built ourselves up through better wages, better living. We're sending our kids to college. I mean, we're buying stuff that we can make our own. We can be proud again. I mean, we're coal miners, and that's something that we want to do. Now with all the cutbacks and the closing at the mines, we're forced to take lower paying jobs, or worse, sign up on government assistance, or move out of West Virginia. And it's a beautiful state. We all love it. We're proud. Like I said, we're a proud bunch. I've watched my brother. He's moved out for work. My family's business dwindled. You know, I've got friends, their businesses closed down. Whole towns in West Virginia have turned into ghost towns now with the cutbacks and the layoffs and the mine closings. I mean, West Virginia, the EPA has just done so much. They're asking for a $500 million increase in their budget. I know y'all know that. And I know 27 million of that is spent just on lawyers. You know, the budgets continue to fight coal production, its companies and its workers. Patriot's company where I work at has filed for bankruptcy. They're fighting back out of it now. I mean, we've done a little bit of everything. They've spent tens of millions of dollars on selenium containment. The regulations promoted by the EPA's policy has driven our price of production through the roof. In any business, to manage costs in order to stay profitable or employ workers. In order to be cost-effective mine, we all have to watch cost. But unfortunately, the EPA, with all their rules and regulations, they're driving the cost it just keeps going up and up, and we cannot be competitive in this global market. I mean, China and everybody else is mining coal, and it's not working with us. They're adding so much money to our production cost. It's just impossible. As they increase our costs, it forces a lot of mines to go out of business, like I said. I'm here today to ask, on behalf of all the West Virginians, that just please fight for us. The EPA continue to destroy our livelihoods. It's been said in here enough. You know, like I said, I'm a foster parent. We're spending money through budgets on stuff that's overregulated the way it is on the EPA side of it. You know, let's spend it on these kids, because with the downsizing the mines and the cutbacks, the kids is who loses out. Families struggle, kids get neglected, they get put off to the side. You know, some people's not, and let's spend our money on these kids. Let's spend our money to build the livelihoods back for these families. You know, that's one of the things we're trying to do is just, with them overstepping their bounds, you know, the EPA's retroactively vetoed already. We've got mining permits out there that's been permitted, and then they go right back and they're jerking the permits away from those families. You know, 2 or 3 times this has happened. They've issued everything. The Army Corps of Engineers, everybody has signed off on these permits, and then they're just going back and saying no. The EPA is saying no, we're not going to do it. Families in our mind, I mean, it would create so much with these permits. You know, we get back to having a life for ourselves. I would just like to thank the committee for giving me this chance to speak with all my heart. Respectfully, I ask that you look to fund the core functions of the EPA that they have traditionally known and worked alone. They are overstepping their reach and hurting the fine men and women of West Virginia and their families. We as coal miners have changed everything we've done in the past. We've changed it for the EPA. We're not asking for special treatment, just for a fair chance. Like I said, I'm a coal miner like my many brothers and sisters at the mines. All we want to do is continue to mine our coal and make a living for our family. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your testimony. I can feel the pain from, I'd like to get out there. I'd like to, I know some of the members see what's going on out there. And you see an industry like that, the base industry, which multiplies itself throughout the economy, not just in West Virginia or Pennsylvania or other coal-producing states, but throughout the United States. And it's a sad situation. But, Ms. McCullum?
Just thank you very much for your testimony, gentlemen.
Thank you for giving this opportunity.
Mike? God bless you. Mr. Jenkins?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, let me just express my appreciation. I'm proud to be sitting here, and of course, Chairman Rogers had, I think, Mr. Byrd, Doug, and Jordan are my constituents. And, to get the invitation, Mr. Chairman, that you provided means a lot to them. And they, over these last few weeks getting ready, they've thought about what they would say. But as much as anything, I think part of this opportunity is what they heard. And your comments of concern, I know that was important to them, so thank you. And to Chairman Rogers, whose opening remarks, similarly, I think not only can Doug and Jordan, feel good for having represented a voice from West Virginia, they also heard a level of caring. And to the ranking member, thank you as well. So this was important, and then to have their families here. As you know, Mr. Chairman, a couple of weeks ago, I challenged Secretary McCarthy, come to West Virginia. Come to West Virginia and hear from West Virginians. And she can't bring herself, candidly, to say yes. Well, it was important, as you've provided this opportunity, that we brought West Virginia voices to Washington and to have their voices heard before this important committee that is going to have an impact on the purse strings and I'll say it, a war on coal. So I appreciate your leadership, Mr. Chairman, and for Chairman Rogers of the full committee, and to Doug and to Jordan, to their wives, to Gracie and their family. We're honored to have you, and thank you for your voice here today. I'm sorry that Secretary McCarthy won't come to West Virginia, but we're glad you were here to have heard in Washington. So
That was very heartfelt, and we heard you. So I'm going to try to get schedules around here are terrible, but I'm going to try to get out to your country as soon as I can.
These guys are the salt of the earth, and there's thousands just like them that crawl on their hands and knees every day. That's what's made this country great.
Yeah.
And now the EPA has abandoned these people.
Yeah.
Intentionally.
well said.
Well, we thank you. God bless you.
Thank you.
Your excuse. Okay. Next, Mr. Dan Byers, Senior Director, Partnership for a Better Energy Future. And if Dan, if you could sit over here on the right, on my right. Mr. Eric Cavaza, National Association of Abandoned Mine Land Programs. Mr. John Safanko, Deputy Director, Office of Active Abandoned Mines. And Fred Smith, Director of the Center for Advancing Capitalism. I know Fred from a long time. Hey there, Fred, how you doing? Okay, thank you for coming out today. You probably heard my, we're going to try to get back on the 5-minute rule, and we've got some pretty emotional testimony here, so I got a little leeway. But I'm going to start with you, Dan. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Great, thanks. Chairman Calvert, Ranking Member McCollum, Congressman Simpson, thanks for the opportunity to testify today on EPA's FY16 budget request, and in particular on the Clean Power Plan that we're hearing so much about. I'm Dan Byers. I'm Senior Director for Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and I'm appearing before you today on behalf of the Partnership for a Better Energy Future, coalition of 177 business organizations that represent over 80% of the U.S. economy, and we're united in support of an all-of-the-above energy strategy that ensures continued availability of reliable and affordable energy. Released in June 2014, EPA's Clean Power Plan would require states to reduce carbon dioxide emissions through a fundamental transformation of America's electricity system. The rule is the centerpiece of President Obama's Climate Action Plan, and EPA has made clear that its development and promulgation is the agency's top budget and policy priority. Accordingly, the partnership appreciates this opportunity to communicate the business and industrial community's concerns with the proposal. In short, the CPP is an extremely costly undertaking that is incompatible with both practical and technical aspects of America's electricity system, and it represents a vast expansion of the agency's regulatory reach into authorities long held by states. I will briefly outline just 3 of the partnership's concerns detailed in my written testimony. First, the CPP will increase energy prices. EPA's own conservative estimates project that this rule will cause inflation-adjusted nationwide electricity price increases of between 6 and 7% in 2020 and up to 12% in some locations. EPA estimates annual compliance costs rising up to $8.8 billion in 2030, and these are power sector costs only, and they do not capture the subsequent spillover impacts of higher electricity rates on overall economic activity. A separate industry-funded study found that the total cost of the rule would be between $366 billion to $479 billion over a 15-year time frame. And it's important to note that these higher energy prices disproportionately harm low-income and middle-income families and those on fixed incomes. Second key point, states have major substantive concerns with EPA's proposed rule. States are ultimately tasked with implementing the rule, and they filed detailed comments that reveal widespread concerns with the agency's approach. We prepared a summary of official state comments that were filed into the docket last December and found that 32 states have questioned the legality of the rule, 32 states have raised reliability concerns, 34 object to EPA's rushed timelines, 33 object to the rule's lack of credit for actions taken prior to 2012, and 40 different states question the achievability of at least one of the building blocks upon which the rule is based. The EPA has promised that close cooperation with states would be central to its regulatory development process. The extent and magnitude of these concerns illustrate that EPA must make major changes to the rule for that promise to become a reality. Third, global context illustrates the all-pain, no-gain nature of the rule. EPA's rule is certain to impose billions of dollars of cost to the U.S. economy, but they will fail to meaningfully reduce CO2 emissions on a global scale. For example, the projected CO2 emissions reduction from the rule is at most 550 million metric tons in 2030. This represents 1.3% of global emissions in that year and would offset the equivalent of just 13 and a half days of Chinese emissions. And obviously in China, emissions have been rising rapidly for some time and will continue to do so for some time. Because so many American companies compete on a global scale, the electricity and related price increases resulting from this rule will disproportionately impact energy-intensive, trade-exposed industries such as manufacturing and refining. And these circumstances may not actually serve to reduce carbon emissions, but instead simply move them to other countries that have not implemented similar restrictions and have far inferior environmental controls. So in conclusion, the partnership appreciates the opportunity to testify on this matter. I've only really scratched the surface of the flaws and problems we see with the rule, but we want to offer ourselves as a resource to you and your members going forward, and we encourage you to take any and all actions you can to reduce the threats from the rule.
Thank you, Mr. Byers.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Stefanto.
Good afternoon.
You might move the mic up a little bit closer. That'd be good. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm appearing here today on behalf of the Interstate Mining Compact Commission, an organization representing 26 states that regulate active coal mining operations and restore abandoned mine lands pursuant to the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act. I'm here to present the views of the Compact's member states concerning the fiscal year 2016 budget request for the Office of Surface Mining. In its proposed budget, OSM is requesting $63.5 million to fund Title V grants to states for the implementation of their regulatory programs, a reduction of $5.1 million or 7.4% below the fiscal 2015 enacted level. Mr. Chairman, these are admittedly tough times for state and federal budgets, and hard choices need to be made on how we efficiently and effectively spend our limited dollars. Environmental protection associated with coal mining operations is no exception. Once again, in fiscal year 2016, we are faced with the decision about the extent to which the federal government will support these funding commitments and the state lead concept for program implementation crafted by Congress under SMACRA. OSM's budget proposes to move us away from these commitments and concepts. States are struggling to match federal dollars for these programs. Signals from the federal government that it is wavering in its support concerning both dollars and the state's ability to run effective programs will do little to build confidence. This is not the time to reverse the course set by Congress for its support of state programs over the past several years. We therefore urge the subcommittee to reject OSM's proposed cut of $5.1 million for state Title V grants and restore the grant level to $68.6 million as supported by state funding requests. As rationale for these reductions, OSM asserts that any shortfalls in fiscal year 2016 can be covered by the carryover from previous fiscal years. While the states understand OSM's position, we believe this plan to be short-sighted and that it fails to consider improving fiscal conditions in many states and the damaging precedent set by appropriating suboptimal grant amounts. Furthermore, there is no guarantee that these carryover funds will be available into the future or be reprogrammed for other purposes. OSM's budget also contains a request to increase the agency's own program operations by almost $4 million to improve implementation of existing laws, which in our view is code language for enhanced federal oversight of state programs. We do not believe this is adequate justification for this proposed increase and urge you to reject it as you have done in the past. Should OSM wish to enhance state primacy, we have recently provided a plethora of suggested recommendations as part of a government efficiency initiative that OSM has yet to respond to, much less adopt. Our written statement details several concerns with respect to the abandoned mineland program under Title IV of SMACRA. My colleague Erica Vazza from Pennsylvania will now specifically address those.
Thanks, John. I'm appearing today on behalf of the National Association of Abandoned Mineland Programs, which represents 31 states and tribes, 28 of which implement federally approved AML programs authorized under SMACRA. Based on SMACRA fee projections, the FY 2016 mandatory appropriation for state and tribal AML grants should be $209 million. The Office of Surface Mining is requesting $385 million, an increase of $176 million. This represents $200 million in new funding for the President's Power Plus plan and a reduction of $24 million for payments to certified states and tribes based on the budget proposal to eliminate funding for these programs. While we understand these are mandatory appropriations, we want to bring several critical aspects of OSM's proposed budget to your attention, given their implications for states and tribes. From the beginning of SMACRA in 1977, Congress promised that at least half of the money generated from fees collected within the boundaries of a state or tribe would be returned to them for the purposes described in the Act. For these certified programs, these funds can be used for cleaning up abandoned coal and hard rock mines, sustainable development, and infrastructure improvements, all of which stimulate economic activity, protect public health and safety, create green jobs, and improve the environment. We therefore respectfully ask the subcommittee to support funding for certified states and tribes and turn back any efforts to amend SMACRA in this regard. 3 other legislative proposals in the budget would significantly reform the way SMACRA is currently structured. They include restoring the AML reclamation fee to pre-2006 levels, releasing $1 billion from the AML Trust Fund for the President's Power Plus plan, and providing enhanced payouts for the United Mine Workers pension plans. While each of these have merit in their own regard, taken together they essentially represent a significant revision to Title IV of SMACRA. The states and tribes strongly support full reauthorization and have initiated efforts to develop a legislative strategy to make this happen in advance of the expiration of fee collection authority in 2021. We are concerned about any piecemeal approach to amending SMACRA that fails to take into account the interrelatedness of several key components of the program. The states and tribes only became aware of these far-reaching proposals when the budget was released in February and are still ascertaining how they would operate and impact our programs. We therefore request that this subcommittee strongly recommend robust coordination with the states and tribes before the administration advances any of these proposals with Congress. Thank you for the opportunity to present our views, and we would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for your testimony. Fred, good to see you. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Calvert, Ranking Member McCullum, and members of the subcommittee. I'm pleased today to discuss ways in which you might do less, spend less, regulate less, and so forth. I think too often environmental and other issues like that are viewed as an area where we've got to always do more, ignoring what private sectors might do in addition, what they might complement that effort. If we could liberalize current regulation, limit new regulations, being spending limits, encourage creative privatization, and move away from the bureaucratic approach we've adopted over the last century. Consider policies that discourage private owners from playing a more positive role in the environment. ESA is a classic example of that. If you make your properties more wildlife friendly, you might attract some endangered species, leading to land use restrictions, losses for your property, and of course no compensation. John Kenneth Galbraith once observed that in America our gardens and our parks are beautiful, while our gardens are beautiful, while our public parks are often a disaster. Now, Galbraith saw that as an argument for more government. Most of us, I think, it might suggest a broader private role. Private property, we know in the past, has not only advanced economic interest, it's advanced aesthetic, cultural, spiritual values as well. The cathedrals of God, like the cathedrals of nature, could be built on private property. Linking private property is a way of linking man and nature, creating powerful conservation incentives. Yet, since the early 20th century, essentially no resource that at that time was under federal control has passed into private hands. The result is that much of the West remains under federal control. For too long, I think Americans have passively accepted that state of affairs. It is now time to question that policy, to move those lands back into private hands. We can see the real-world history of that politicization of our land policy through the forestry area, where environmental lobbyists have insisted that nothing, no timber, be harvested even if it was dead or diseased. As a result, we've had forests that have been mismanaged, plagued by disease infestation, catastrophic wildfires. Private forestry managers have ignored the superior techniques adopted by private wildlife managers. We need forestry managers. We need to broaden the role of private sector in that area too. There are officials at the state level who are requesting that Congress complete the transfer of lands from the federal government back to the states. Utah legislatures are among those making this request. I would urge that this committee consider what they can do to help them make that transfer, and to zero out all fundings that acquire any new federal lands. We already have vastly too much mismanaged federal lands. In particular, zero out the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Private ownership creates a creative stewardship and novel approach to wildlife management. Examples in CI's examined over the years: Hawk Mountain Bird Sanctuary in Berks County, Pennsylvania, at a time when hawks were being killed as a pest by most people. Some people use private property to protect them. Reefs in Alabama and Florida are built privately to help protect coastal fisheries there. There are a lot of private organizations, even the Ornament Society, who use private property not only for economic purposes, but also for environmental purposes. We need to do more in that area. Private ownership not only encourages wise management, encourages innovation. In the natural resource area, one of the areas that the mining industry is affected by, the creation of subsurface mineral rights allowed miners to spend time working with surface owners to find ways to access those mineral rights. And to do that, they needed to know what was under the ground, and that encouraged the development of the science of seismology. Seismology allowed vast improvements in exploration and extraction technique, and essentially evolved the possibility of the hydraulic fracking breakthrough, which has resolved, or at least reassured, those fearful of America's energy insufficiency, America's depletion. We've proved that technology and free property rights and capitalism can solve those problems. Absent property rights, we wouldn't have gotten that far. Finally, I advise the committee to require the Department of Interior to craft a policy under which private parties could adopt, ecological adoption, manage certain environmental resources. One example, the Department of Interior has caves. They have no cave management experience. Why wouldn't they consider transferring those caves to spelunking groups who have the passion and the knowledge to manage those privately? It is time to give natural lands and wildlife some of the advantage that private property has given so much of our society. A lot to talk about, but that starts the process.
I thank the gentleman, and we appreciate the panel's testimony. Mr. Simpson, do you have any questions?
No.
Ms. McCollum?
I'm fine, thank you. It was interesting.
One question, because I know you've been involved in this, Mr. Smith, on the you had a FOA request regarding former EPA Director Lisa Jackson's use of a private email account. What's going on with that? I was just curious.
It's called the Richard Windsor story. Gina McCarty, like we're finding others, use private email accounts to do a lot of their business on. We FOIA'd that request because under transparency laws, they're supposed to release those. We've been in negotiations with EPA for 6 months now, and after all that negotiation, they came up with that compromise. They would release 100 emails a month out of the 120,000 we've asked them to. And so in 2115, we'd have them all, and then we could sue again if we thought they were badly decided. We thought that was inappropriate, given specifically that Ms. Hillary Clinton has got 40,000 or so emails that she's going to release in 4 months. Now, I don't want to go too far in this area, but it looks like if Ms. Clinton can do that quickly, the EPA, with all of its resources, could go a little faster than that. We think it's an attempt to stonewall. We think that the committee should consider strongly zeroing out the communication budget of EPA until such time as they can use the communication skills they have to communicate to the American public what was going on under these accounts. The transparency is supposedly a virtue of this administration. We'd like to see that transparency translated into reality.
Thank you. Any other comments? With that, this panel is adjourned. We appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a vote on, but I think we have some time. And I know that Julia Bromley is here to introduce a member of the next panel, so if we could introduce that, maybe then go off for a vote, we could do that. So if I could ask Mr. Brian McDonald from the city of Oxnard to come forward. Mr. Kyle Holman, founder and partner of Protect the Environment. Mr. Ron Nunez, chairman of the National Utility Contractors Association. And Dick Pedersen, the past president of the Environmental Council of the States. So we can kind of just go up that. Line up here. Okay. All right. First, I'm going to introduce Julia Brownlee to introduce our first witness, Mr. Brian McDonald, councilman from the city of Oxnard. Julia?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and ranking member and members of the subcommittee. I really do appreciate the opportunity to be here. I am extremely proud to introduce my constituent and an important leader in my district, Oxnard City Councilman Brian McDonald, and wholeheartedly share his support for funding of the EPA Superfund program. I also want to recognize Supervisor Kathy Long and Supervisor John Zaragoza, who are also here to really demonstrate the countywide support for this in wetlands in Southern California, which are home to hundreds of species of migratory birds. Full remediation of the site is a matter of environmental justice and public safety, and it can only happen with the full support of the EPA Superfund program. And I will say, if you fly down the California coastline, all of a sudden you are flying across a beautiful coastline and suddenly see a big eyesore in Oxnard. So I want to thank you very, very much for inviting me and inviting Councilman McDonald to share the city's views.
Thank you for that introduction. We're going to just go into recess for, how many votes do we have? 4 votes. So I apologize for the delay, but that's why they pay us the big bucks, so we have to go vote. And then we'll come right back right after the votes.
There's a little place down the hallway where you can get a Coke and a candy bar and an apple.
Thank you very much.
We're in recess.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Hopefully I'll be back.
Okay. Well, we almost made it.
Yes, sir. Not quite, though.
Did you, I thought I gave.
Yeah, I guess I got lost.
Okay.
Do you guys mind sliding down one? Then
Sure.
I don't have to drag a mic.
Appreciate it. It's all yours. Nothing wrong with me, I apologize.
We could switch. I can read you.
Yeah.
All right, I'm
I
going to
got
get
it
your
already
bag
go.
because we're going to just go down the hall. We're gonna do
Okay.
something real quick.
Have a good time. I can answer voicemails or something.
I'm sorry, Ian, I just wanted to say hi. Good to see you again.
How are you doing?
Good, thank you. How have you been?
Pretty good.
Yeah. I don't want to take up your time, I just wanted to say hello, so just here with you.
I'm sorry.
It's funny to be Call me if I call you. Thank you.
Are the wood stacked or compressed?
I'm sorry, what?
Are the boats stacked or compressed, or how long do you think about that?
What did the chairman say?
15
15 minutes? That's what it is then.
15 minutes, 4 votes.
Excuse me. Ms. Kilgore? Oh, Tommy Cassidy. How are you?
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, our guys sitting over here. Eric's the executive director right now. Tom, going to be chatting, so it's great. Thanks a lot. Cool. You going up to New England anytime soon with that Kilgore in there?
Yes, very soon. We're going out to Worcester.
Excellent.
Yeah, no problem. Oh, it's our fault. No problem. I don't know. It's not a problem, but we'll put them out.
Apologize for all that. Hearing will reconvene. I'll just kind of, we're operating under the 5-minute rule. Light's green, you're great. If it's yellow, hurry up, and red, we're done. So appreciate your coming. And with that, Mr. McDonald, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon to the committee, Chair Calvert, Ranking Member McCollum, and distinguished members. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak here. I will probably try and abbreviate my submitted testimony in the interest of time. Hopefully that's acceptable. I would also...
Your complete testimony will be entered into the record.
Thank you, sir. I'd also like to thank Supervisor Zaragoza and Long from the County of Ventura being here in support of my testimony and my community. This is very important to all of us. I bring you greetings from Mayor Tim Flynn, Mayor Pro Tem Carmen Ramirez, and all the City Council of the City of Oxnard, and I too am a member of that City Council. I'm here to discuss and provide evidence or testimony on the issue of the Halico development in the City of Oxnard. And it is very important to Oxnard, national security benefits of continual federal participation and remediation of a federally designated Superfund site to respectfully request that the committee support full funding for EPA's Superfund program, which this site has been identified in. By way of background, Oxnard was incorporated in 1903, named after the Oxnard brothers and recognized by the County of Ventura. And we've grown into the largest city in the County of Ventura, which is the next county north of Los Angeles on the California coast. And we have just a little over 200,000 residents. Located on California's beautiful central coast, the city of Oxnard is home to the California Strawberry Festival, neighbor to the breathtaking Channel Islands National Park and Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary, Naval Base Ventura County, which is comprised of Naval Air Station Point Mugu and Construction Battalion Center Port Hueneme, two separate facilities under one unified command. We also have the Port of Hueneme adjacent to us and miles of beautiful beaches and the Halico Superfund site in our community. As the city of Oxnard grew in the early 1900s, I don't think we fully recognized the beauty and importance of our coastline. And as we were first developing, that was considered an outlying area that no one really desired to live in or visit or anything else. So we tended to locate things there that, in today's standards we would not do, but they're there and we have to deal with them. So the importance to us is the opportunity to restore this beautiful wetland area to its original habitat, its original state, and remove the Halico Engineering Company, which is detrimental to our environment and to our community. That engineering company operated a secondary metal smelter at the site from 1965 to about 2004 and recovered a variety of materials through the smelting process, including aluminum, magnesium, zinc, so on and so forth, from scrap metal they took into the facility. The original site contains about an 11-acre primary site and a 26-acre secondary site, which is the site of what we refer to as a slag heap. The residual products that were left over from the smelting process that were stored and deposited on that property. During its 40 years of operation, Halico produced a large quantity of waste, which we're now trying to deal with, and a lot of residual metals in there that are just not conducive to good health or well-being of the community. I'm kind of a visual person, so what I'd like to do is give you a comparison of the enormity of what we're talking about. And I selected the White House as a comparison, not in disrespect for that office or anyone that works there, but I wanted to give a visual idea of what people would see if they were looking at our slag heap in comparison to something that everyone recognizes. And the White House itself has a footprint of about 0.33 acres, stands about 70 feet tall. And generally, when people look at it, they know what they're looking at, and they understand, and they visualize how big that is. Well, the Halico site is about 40 feet in height, but covers about 4.39 acres in terms of a footprint. So you're looking at something that is about 13 times bigger than the original White House, and 2/3 again as tall as the original White House. So it's a pretty monumental piece of material that we're trying to eliminate from our community. Ultimately, Halico abandoned this site and filed for bankruptcy, leaving about 700,000 cubic yards of material in the waste management area. And that's what we're talking about, is the waste management area adjacent to the original Halico site. And that's why I use the visual of the White House. Just 700,000 cubic yards is hard for me to grasp in terms of a visual picture, but now that you have something to compare it to. This site has elevated levels of aluminum, barium, beryllium, cadmium, chromium, copper, lead, magnesium, manganese, nickel, and zinc, to name a few. The problem with this site is that it is over a natural resource area, our water table, and through natural effects, a lot of these items are filtering into our groundwater, into our ecosystem, and even into the ocean. This site is right on the ocean front in Oxnard, in the Ormond Beach wetlands area. Unlike other coastal communities, Oxnard has been an industrial dumping ground for polluting industries and actual dumping of toxic waste for many, many years. This includes 2 older power plants, one on either end of the city, so we are bookended by 2 gas-burning, antiquated power systems that you can see from miles away. The stacks are over 150 feet tall. And it's sad to have those 2 landmarks for the entrance or the gateways to our community from either side. Approximately 17% of the people in our city live below the poverty level. And our community is comprised of about 75% Latino population, 37% foreign-born, and that includes many of the farm working population because we are a very large agrarian-based community. And a lot of our economy comes out of the agrarian system. Less than 15% of the population in our community holds a bachelor's degree. In our region of Southern California, it's estimated that 1 in 4 children live in poverty. And many of these families that live in those poverty conditions live in the area immediately adjacent to Halico. I apologize. It looks like I'm out of time already. I'm sorry, sir.
That up real quick.
I will. I didn't realize how short a time it was. In closing, I would just like to thank Congresswoman Brownlee for the wonderful opening comments on behalf of myself and my city, you, the committee. I'd also like to thank Senators Feinstein and Barbara Boxer and the County of Ventura for being excellent partners in helping us to proceed to the future and correct this problem. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Mr. Holman?
Yes.
You're with the founder and partner Protect the Environmental.
Yeah, I'm actually with Cancer Survivors Against Radon.
Okay, great. Well, welcome.
Thank you. Chairman Calvert, Ranking Member McCollum. As I mentioned, I'm here today on behalf of Cancer Survivors Against Radon, and I'm here today to testify in support of restoring and maintaining the $8 million in funding for EPA's state indoor radon grant program. I grew up in a small town in southern Ohio. My dad was a forester, and I spent a lot of time outdoors, hunting mushrooms, learning about ginseng, all kinds of things like that. Our home of more than 30 years was located on a hillside, and it backed up to the Appalachian Mountains. I've got a lot of great memories of the home I grew up loving, but quite frankly, that home later proved deadly to my father. In December of 2008, I received a call that, quite frankly, changed my life. My father had been diagnosed with lung cancer. He didn't understand because he was a non-smoker. And smoking is what causes lung cancer, right? No, not always. So, first question, how could this be happening to me? And for the first time in my life, I heard fear in the voice of my father. It's not something I had ever heard before. It was unimaginable to me as an adult who still looked up on this guy as my Superman. 6 months later, Dad died. I was fortunate to have spent the last month of his life with him, and he wasn't ready to go. He still had things that he wanted to accomplish. He fought for his life, but cancer ultimately won the battle, and this man left the world much too soon. Our home tested at 30 picocuries per liter of air. That's 7 times greater than the EPA action level. To put this into perspective, I grew up living in a home that was exposing me and my family to the radiation dose equivalent to 1,500 chest x-rays per year. That's a high dose of radiation. If we had known this, Dad might still be here today. Radon-induced lung cancer is preventable. We didn't know. Unlike my father, I am a cancer survivor. I've won my battle. Understanding that each day a person in our country loses their own battle with radon-induced lung cancer every 26 minutes is a pretty sobering fact. I know what my family has gone through, and knowing these lives could be saved is why I'm here today. 10 years ago, the U.S. Surgeon General warned us about radon, advising that every home and building should be tested. Our state radon programs are the most important resources in making our citizens aware of this warning. The SURGE program is the only federal program that exists today to help our state programs with this mission. And the FY16 budget zeroes it, completely eliminates that program. From my perspective, cutting our nation's radon program is the exact opposite of what's needed. In fact, a strong case can be made that we should actually be spending more to prevent radon-induced lung cancer. In addition to the lives saved, the return on investment is preventing the direct and indirect health care burden of an estimated $7.2 billion per year. We're putting $8 million towards this, and it's a $7.2 billion health burden. Where else can you get a return on that investment like that? It's preventable. According to EPA's own Inspector General's 2008 report, nearly 2 decades after passage of the 1988 Indoor Radon Abatement Act, IRA, exposure to indoor radon continues to grow. Efforts to reduce exposure through mitigation or building with radon-resistant new construction has not kept pace. The radon problem in our country is getting worse. It's not getting better. We have more buildings today with elevated radon levels than when your colleagues passed the Indoor Radon Abatement Act in 1988. According to a Today Show report, an estimated 70,000 classrooms contain toxic levels of radon. 1 of every 15 homes in our country contains toxic levels of radioactive gas. Your state and your state have elevated concentrations of radon. Does this sound like a program that should be cut or eliminated? I sincerely hope not. The hard reality is that this is a program that's voluntary, and it's proven to be ineffective. With the evident ineffectiveness of the program, why hasn't EPA taken steps to regulate? How many more lives need to be taken by this disease before EPA wakes up? The overall impact of eliminating the SURGE program will be the systematic elimination of our country's outreach and education efforts as they pertain to radon. A majority of the 45 state and tribal programs would cease. A recent Blue Sky report that we've looked at suggested only 3 of those programs would actually be in operation if those funds go away. And I know I'm out of time. I'll summarize and wrap up now. I would ask that the committee respectfully consider the following. Restore the funds. It's $8 million. We need those dollars at the state level. There's also another game that seems to be played within EPA, and that is, well, let's restore the funds, but let's take away the full-time employment to administer those funds. There's a $1 million increase for the environmental protection management with a condition added. We would like to suggest that we add language that would protect the full-time employees necessary to administer those regional funds. In wrapping up, again, thank you for allowing me to testify today. The subcommittee has a strong, consistent history in supporting this appropriation, and your action in helping protect these funds will save lives and prevent lung cancer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, Mr. Ronald Nunez, the National Utility Contractors Association.
Thank you, Chairman Calvert. Ranking Member McCollum. I have to shut it off. Sorry. On behalf of the National Utility Contractors Association, its coalition partners, the Clean Water Council, and my own company, R.T. Nunes & Sons, I appreciate the opportunity to testify regarding the job creation and economic benefits that come with the investment in water infrastructure through the EPA's Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds. My company specializes in site utility construction. We have constructed thousands of linear feet of water and sewer infrastructure, as well as river and dam preservation projects. NUCA is a family of nearly 1,300 companies across the nation that build, repair, and maintain underground water, wastewater, gas, electric, and telecommunication infrastructure systems. NUCA also serves as chair of the Clean Water Council, a coalition of 34 national organizations committed to ensuring a high quality of life through sound environmental infrastructure. Over the past month, the Clean Water Council has highlighted an infrastructure story from each member of this subcommittee's district on our blog, cleanwaterweekly.com. I'd like to highlight some of those stories today.
Ranking Member McCollum, in Minnesota, the University of Minnesota's Water Research Center in 2011 found that of estimated 535,000 individual sewage treatment systems in Minnesota, about 39% are failing or pose an imminent threat to public health and safety. The report stated that over the next 20 years, more than $6 billion will be needed for improvements for drinking water systems, more than $4.5 billion for public wastewater systems, and more than $1.2 billion for individual wastewater systems in your state. In California, sir, Chairman Calvert, late last year, that major Marietta thoroughfare was closed for nearly a week following a water main break. The water pressure was so high, it was enough to crack the road, destroy nearly 1,000 feet of road. The 16-inch water main connected to the main pump station imports water from Lake Skinner. You lost, as a result, you lost 500,000 gallons of water, estimated. These stories are consistent with my personal experience in my home state of Rhode Island, where major reservoir supply lines have been broken. There have been 100-year-old pipes and 100-year-old valves that were unable to operate, and consequently we've lost, over the years, millions and millions of gallons of water. It is undeniable that from coast to coast, America needs to address aging and failing infrastructure. According to the EPA's Drinking Water Infrastructure Needs Survey and Assessment, America's drinking water infrastructure needs will cost $384.2 billion over the next 20 years, a nearly $50 billion increase over the last assessment, indicating we are losing ground and falling further behind. Infrastructure investments, programs like EPA's SRF programs, are remarkably effective and efficient, but tremendously underfunded. The inevitable result is deteriorating infrastructure and fewer jobs for this critical work. SRF programs are in a unique position to not only improve America's infrastructure, but to generate significant job creation and economic production. The Clean Water Council released an economic impact study on the job creation and economic benefits that come from water and wastewater infrastructure projects called Sudden Impact. It found that $1 billion in infrastructure investment could create approximately 27,000 jobs with an average annual earnings of more than $50,000 annually, and between $2.8 and $3.4 billion in economic stimulation. Just as importantly, the Sudden Impact study found that approximately $82.4 million would be generated for state and local taxes, allowing states to gain a better financial position to take on more infrastructure projects and begin to repair water and wastewater systems proactively rather than more expensively reactively. The message behind these statistics is clear. Investment in water and wastewater infrastructure projects is an investment in an American asset, creating countless American jobs, countless American industries, generating state and local tax revenue, and turning out considerable fiscal activity through local economies while rebuilding critical infrastructure to the country's deteriorating requirements. In closing, America can function without environmental infrastructure. Cannot function without environmental infrastructure. It's necessary for public health, good for business. It connects nearly everything we do on a daily basis and is a precondition to economic renewal and growth. NUCA strongly supports continued investments in the EPA's clean water drinking and state revolving fund programs, and respectfully requests you address these concerns through the state revolving funds appropriations to the Environmental Protection Agency. Thank you for the opportunity to testify to this subcommittee, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you may have them.
Thank the gentleman. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Peterson, and we'll ask the panel some questions. Mr. Peterson, you're right.
Yes, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chairman Calvert, Ranking Member McCollum, and members of the subcommittee. I am Dick Peterson, Director, Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, testifying as past president and on behalf of the members of the Environmental Council of States on the fiscal year 16 budget for EPA. We support the President's budget request of $3.6 billion in appropriations for state and tribal assistance grants, or STAG. Within STAG, there are 19 categorical grants proposed at $1.162 billion. These grants fund core state work in clean air, water, and waste. If enacted by Congress, the 2016 President's budget request would be the highest categorical grant amount since the creation of EPA in 1970, other than fiscal year 2004 enacted level of $1.168 billion. The time is now to meaningfully invest in states. The STAG also requests $2.3 billion for the important clean water and drinking water state revolving funds, $110 million for brownfields projects, and $10 million for diesel emission grants. We support these requests. I'd like to offer a few reasons why your investment in states will deliver many times over. States are the frontline implementers of the nation's environmental laws and programs. The major federal environmental statutes have state-assumed authority over the federal programs and then to receive financial assistance in order to operate these federal programs. A state match is usually required. Through general operating funds, fees, and other means, states provide, on average, well over one-half, in many states, three-quarters of the funds to operate federally delegated programs. Critical to our success is federal funding through STAG. In these tight budget times, I have to call out the reality to 50 states of what may seem like a very large number. The President's budget request increases 8 categorical grants, and that overall categorical grants receive a $108 million requested increase. This means that the actual increase requested for state environmental programs, if appropriated, would be $77 million more than fiscal year 2015 enacted. That's just over $1 million per state. States and EPA, as co-regulators, cannot operate a 1980s model of environmental protection and services in 2015. This is why I encourage support for the $15.7 million increase to the Environmental Information Categorical Grant to states. Technology is essential to enhancing how states deliver inspections, monitoring, permits, and public information. This competitively awarded grant totals $25.3 million nationally. These funds facilitate states' continued efforts to implement electronic permitting and reporting systems, allowing information to be processed, reviewed, shared between states and EPA, and acted upon more quickly. Every major permitting program implemented by EPA in the state is in rapid modernization, efforts that are absolutely necessary. We are committed to joint governance, to better decision-making, and to increased transparency and efficiency through e-enterprise for the Environment Initiative. Your support for this categorical grant will make a real difference to the states, companies, and the public. The fiscal year 2016 budget includes a proposal to create a Clean Power Incentive Fund for states that can go above and beyond the guidelines that will be in the final Clean Power Plan for emission reductions, or that can achieve them more quickly. We encourage you to support this new fund, but to make it available to all states. Every state can use clean energy funding. After years of highlighting the significant difficulties that rescissions cause at the state level, we appreciate that the budget request contains no rescissions. Finally, I leave you with a cost-neutral item that can help states. State commissioners require flexibility to direct the federal resources we receive to the environmental needs in our states. Several of the proposed fiscal year 2016 funding increases are accompanied by budget justification language that appears to constrain states' ability to respond to state priorities and needs while still supporting overall national environmental priorities. Directing funding undermines state flexibility and needed support for ongoing, everyday implementation of nation's environmental laws. Mr. Chairman, Ms. Ranking Member, I thank you for the opportunity to provide the State Environmental Agency perspective today, and certainly happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Ms. McDonald, I have driven through Oxnard on many occasions and noticed the old Halicon plant I drove through and for many years, and I have friends that live in Oxnard, and I know that's been a thorn in your side for a long, long time.
Yes, sir, it has.
And that's going to be expensive to move. I know we had the slag material by the old Fontana steel plant for many years, and they were able to figure out a way, I'm not quite sure how, but to use it as road-based material and other things often. You know, I don't exactly know how they did that, but they were able to get rid of a lot of that material, even more material than than you have. That was where they made the steel for the Liberty ships that were constructed in Long Beach during the war. But we appreciate that testimony. We'll take it into account. And Mr. Holman, I know radon has been an issue in front of this committee. We have really a nonpartisan issue here. We're all concerned about that. It affects certain parts of the country more than others, as you're aware, and education is a big part of this. The way they construct homes nowadays, too, is is a big part of it. They don't have the breezeways like the old timers. They knew something we didn't back in those days, and knew that how to build things. But I'm sure that when we start crunching the numbers, we'll try to make sure that we look at that issue very closely. And certainly when I think of old infrastructure in LA last year, I don't know if you saw that when they just finished the Poly Pavilion at UCLA, and an old water pipe, which I think was a big pipe. It was like a 40-inch pressurized water main, broke and completely flooded out the west side of UCLA, the whole campus, and totally destroyed the Poly Pavilion.
I've seen that happen. It's a Holocaust.
Yeah,
It destroys everything in its path.
They just spent millions and millions of dollars redoing the Poly Pavilion. That's where we have our UCLA basketball games, and they had to totally go in and rebuild it. They just filled it with water like a.
This country was founded from the east towards the west. I heard my colleague over here talking about 1903 that were founded. We got communities that were founded in 1620.
Yeah. Matter of fact, there's some pretty old pipes right here in Washington, D.C.
Exactly.
Yeah, some pretty old pipes. Probably some people think it's us, but no, it's not. And Mr. Peterson, certainly SCAG grants are a popular program around here too. But I mentioned we're operating a bunch of committees meeting today. I suspect that they're going to be passing out a budget that our biggest concern is appropriators. There's a 302A number, and then they'll be allocating those numbers out to the various committees, and we'll do the best we can under the restrictions we have.
Appreciate that.
Ms. McCollum?
Well, thank you all for your testimony. I just made a note, and I didn't mean to be rude, but when you mentioned schools, I started doing a little bit of research on this for testing for radon. And so I'm going to hand a note back to our committee staff to just do a little looking into it. It looks like EPA recommends that schools be tested, and that states, when they do remodels and resets, might be requiring testing, so maybe they've caught most of them. So I want to find out what my state and others do, unless you know offhand.
It's not something that's happening.
Okay, well.
Yeah, just case in point. I live in Kentucky now, and just a few short weeks ago, there was a FOIA request with Fayette County government, which is Lexington, and it was determined that the last time the schools had been tested was 1988, which was the year IRA was passed. Okay. The schools are now being tested, and we're finding levels as high as 30 picocuries in some of those schools. It's just simply not being done.
Well, but we'll look into it. I know sometimes we get accused of overregulating, the Environmental Protection Agency gets into things, but I do think that we come together as a community, as brothers and sisters, literally, to do what's in the best interest of public health, and if we're aware about something, then we need to speak up and speak out. So thank you all for your testimony.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. We thank this panel for coming out. Appreciate it. Thank you. You get the award for traveling the furthest distance. I do it every week, so I get it.
Thank you all.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay. The next panel, Mr. Tom Fritz, with the board member of the National On-Site Wastewater Recycling Association. If you could sit over here on the right, Mr. Fritz, and then as Ms. Sheila Sahandi, Executive Director of the Puget Sound Partnership. We have Norm Dix Ghost is sitting with us today. Of course, Norm's still with us. I guess I shouldn't say Ghost.
I was going to say.
Yeah.
Have you heard something I didn't?
Yeah. I'll be getting a call this afternoon. Sorry, Norm. Dr. Sharon B. Mingdao, President, National Institute of Water Resources, and Dr. Robert Grope, Chairman of the USGS Coalition. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
As you know, we're operating under the 5-minute rule, so please, when it's green, please give testimony. When it's yellow, please finish up, and red, we're done. So with that, Mr. Fritz, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Congresswoman, Congressmen, distinguished members of the committee, my name is Tom Fritz. I'm Vice President of Residential Sewage Treatment Company in Grandview, Missouri, near Kansas City. I'm also the past president of the National On-Site Wastewater Recycling Association, or NOWRA, and I'm honored to speak to you today on behalf of the on-site wastewater industry. The on-site industry is a growing and evolving industry supported by small businesses across the country. In my lifetime, I've seen the humble backyard septic tank evolve into a range of sophisticated wastewater treatment solutions that lets families live wherever they want and lets businesses locate nearby to serve them. In all cases, these systems can be built and maintained for less money than sewers and better protect the public health. Another very important benefit, they safely help replenish our dwindling underground aquifers through recharge of treated water on site. Nearly 85 million Americans, more than 25% of the country, are being served by the on-site industry, and that number is growing. Because of this, the technology has exploded. It sometimes reminds me of the computer industry of 30 years ago. Nearly 2 decades ago, the EPA endorsed on-site wastewater systems. Their 1997 report to Congress on use of decentralized wastewater treatment systems stated that this technology is a viable solution to treating and dispersing wastewater. My father-in-law, who started the family business over 65 years ago and is now in the 3rd generation, would talk about installers who would dig septic tank excavations with a shovel. Most anyone with a strong back could be in the business then, but today it takes someone with a strong mind, an entrepreneurial spirit, and a knack for running a small business. 25% of the wastewater needs of this country are being sold, installed, and maintained by small business. In fact, our industry is estimated to be responsible for as many as 150,000 small business jobs. I know that Congressman Cole, as an enrolled member of the Chickasaw Nation, is committed to serving the Native Americans living in Oklahoma and all across this great nation. The on-site industry can increase tribal economic development. NOWRA is proud to have recently trained more than 300 tribal community professionals through Rose State College in Oklahoma. We trained them on septic systems and how to run a septic system business. Congressman Calvert, as a lifelong resident of Riverside County, you are experiencing firsthand the dire issues of water depletion from your aquifers. On-site systems, such as septic tanks, treat wastewater and then disperse it back into the soil where it recharges the aquifers with treated water. Most of the water from municipal treatment plants ends up in rivers where it flows to the ocean or the Gulf and becomes salt water. Using U.S. Census numbers of 2010, it's estimated that on-site wastewater systems discharge an average of 9.9 billion gallons of water back to the soil on a daily basis. That's 3.5 trillion gallons per year. If I've convinced you that we are an important part of the solution to aquifer depletion, to small business growth, and to infrastructure development, I'm sure you're curious to hear how much money we want. We don't want any. At least we don't want any new money.
I think he gets the record.
We do have 2 requests. Currently, more than 99% of the EPA Clean Water State Revolving Fund goes to municipal wastewater projects. Less than 1% goes to the on-site wastewater projects. We would like at least 20% of those funds dedicated to serve the 85 million taxpayers who use on-site systems on a daily basis. Secondly, EPA has exactly 1 full-time employee in the Office of Decentralized Wastewater. We'd like to see at least 20% of the Office of Wastewater's funding be dedicated to increasing staffing and resources for the Office of Decentralized Wastewater. On behalf of the National On-Site Wastewater Recycling Association and the on-site industry, we thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next is Ms., how do you pronounce that? Shida? Sahandi. Great. Very nice to have you here. You're
Thank you, sir.
recognized.
Chairman Calvert, Ranking Member McCollum, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss Puget Sound and the National Estuary Program. My name is Shada Sahandi, and I'm the Executive Director of the Puget Sound Partnership, a non-regulatory Washington State agency established in 2007 to mobilize Puget Sound recovery. Puget Sound is the nation's largest estuary at 29 trillion gallons of water approximately. The basin reaches the Canadian border to the north, the Pacific Ocean to the west, and Mount Rainier to the east. The ecological wealth of Puget Sound is only matched by its economic significance. Puget Sound is the state's economic engine, an aquatic superhighway moving wheat and apples out to the Pacific Rim, leading the nation in the production of farmed shellfish, and now leading the maritime industry with the third largest container gateway in North America. The region is also hallowed ground to 17 treaty tribes, each of which has a reserved right to many of the natural resources of the region. The National Estuary Program, which resides in the EPA budget, funds 28 restoration efforts like ours across the nation. It allows us the flexibility to use non-regulatory approaches to customize recovery actions that meet local needs. By doing so, we're able to significantly leverage federal investments with state, local, tribal, and non-governmental funding. At this time, NEP programs have a collective leverage rate of 15-to-1. I'd like to stress that point. For every federal dollar invested through the NEP program, the associated estuary entities raise an additional $15 from other sources. This foundational program allows leveraging of human capital as well. We at the Puget Sound Partnership work with and help mobilize more than 750 partners in the region. These local programs have real impact on the ground and real people who care about them. The success in Puget Sound is evidenced by the ability to deliver measurable results. For example, since 2007, more than 25,700 acres of habitat have been protected and more than 70 miles of streams have been restored. Since January of 2012, there have been a net improvement to more than 1,800 commercial shellfish harvesting acres. But there is a problem. Despite the great job our region is doing in getting dollars on the ground, projects done and completed, the reality is that the rate of damage to Puget Sound is still exceeding the rate of recovery. We are losing ground. Excuse me. This is because we're handling multiple challenges, old and new, like legacy pollution that has to be cleaned up and tremendous regional population growth, as well as antiquated infrastructure such as stormwater systems and transportation systems that must be reimagined and replaced over time. Additionally, we daily face emergent issues. We see things like the alarming spread of the starfish wasting disease, which causes starfish limbs to literally melt away as they slowly die before our eyes, and we don't know why this is happening. Our juvenile steelhead trout are experiencing 98% mortality rates as they're leaving South Puget Sound. We have orcas that are starving due to lack of fish to eat. And then as they start to digest their own flesh because of low food supply, they're poisoned by the biotoxins that have accumulated in their own blubber. These are sobering and stark realities. So we have to change the direction of that recovery equation so that we're not just managing our decline, but we're stabilizing and turning around that system. We need to accelerate recovery so that communities can enjoy healthy, resilient natural systems that support those thriving economies. To this end, I'm here to ask for your continued support, your strong support for the authorization and appropriation of the National Estuary Program funds in the EPA budget, and for the geographic fund allocation specifically to the Puget Sound area for recovery. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. and the committee for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you for your testimony. By the way, while you were testifying, a ghost just arrived into the, into the committee room. Well, I apologize to Norm. I just make it.
I just wanted to make sure, Mr. Chairman, you knew I was still.
I know. Whenever, yeah. I meant it in a very affectionate way. Our next testimony is from Sharon McDowell, President of the National Institute for Water Resources.
Thank you, Chairman Calvert, Ranking Member McCollum, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Good afternoon. I am Sharon McDowell. I'm Director of the University of Arizona Water Resources Research Center, and I thank you for this opportunity to testify on behalf of the National Institutes for Water Resources, for which I serve as President. I appear before you to support the Water Resources Research Act program, which was enacted in 1964 and is funded through the U.S. Geological Survey budget. Thank you for this committee's strong continuing support for this program. The Act establishes water resources research institutes at academic institutions in each state, as well as for Washington, D.C. and U.S. territories, to fulfill three main objectives: develop, through research, new technology and more efficient methods for resolving local, state, and national water resources challenges, train water scientists and engineers through on-the-job participation in research and projects, and facilitate water resource coordination and the application of research results through the dissemination of information and through technology transfer. Working in partnership with the water industry, government, universities, and the general public, the institutes have indeed fulfilled these objectives. There are two grant components of the program. Funding for the 104B base grant program is divided equally among the institutes, who further the Act's objectives through a competitive grants process and information transfer programs. Each institute matches a minimum of 2 non-federal dollars for each federal dollar received. The second component is the USGS 104G National Competitive Grants Program. In 2014, this program received 68 applications for research dollars, which underwent rigorous peer review by a national panel. 4 projects were funded. I would like to provide just a few examples in these oral remarks of how the institutes work on identifying water resources problems, developing solutions to these problems, and engaging with the public regarding the solutions. There are more examples in my written testimony, and in fact, one of the prior speakers spoke to the Minnesota Water Resources Center, which is a member of our National Association. My institute, the University of Arizona Water Resources Research Center, is an extension and research unit in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. Water Resources Research Act funding has supported considerable work on the quantity and quality of groundwater, which is a critical water resource for Arizona and the nation. A 2014 project investigates groundwater governance. The base grant funding, which was highly leveraged, supported case study research by a graduate student who also helped prepare the journal article, Groundwater Governance in the United States, Common Priorities and Challenges. Base grant funding remains critical to our information transfer activities, which focus on making water resources science and information accessible to stakeholders in Arizona, nationally, and beyond. The California Water Center is working with fruit and wine growers to help maximize crop yields with a minimum amount of irrigation. As this subcommittee knows, competition for water resources in California, as elsewhere, is increasing between urban and agricultural entities. More accurate information on the water requirements of important crops contributes to informed irrigation management decisions. The research funded by the Institute's program investigates the drought responses, water footprint, and wine quality through the imposition of water deficits to increase understanding of water use and fruit quality for specific cultivars, therefore allowing growers to apply a minimum amount of irrigation water to sustain profitable production levels. The West Virginia Institute has focused a few years on the Mon River and its major tributaries and has, through stakeholder engagement and their research, developed a voluntary science-based non-regulatory watershed program to address the sulfate problem in that region. For 5 decades, the institutes, in strong partnership with USGS, have provided significant research results and services to our nation and have proven successful at bringing new water professionals into the workforce. The National Institutes for Water Resources respectfully recommends the subcommittee provide $8,800,000 to the USGS for the Water Resources Research Institute's program for fiscal year 2016. In summary, we respectfully submit that even in times of fiscal challenges, investing in programs on the reliability and quality of water supplies is critically important to the health, safety, quality of life, and economic vitality of our nation's communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Next, Dr. Grope with the USGS Coalition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to talk about the USGS. As you mentioned, I'm chair of the USGS Coalition. I'm also the interim executive director for the American Institute of Biological Sciences. I'm here today as chair of the coalition, which is an alliance of 70 organizations representing the breadth of USGS science and information programs that is united by a common and shared commitment for the continued vitality of the USGS scientific endeavor. We were very pleased to see the administration's request for the USGS for fiscal year 2016. We strongly support the request of $1.2 billion and encourage you to continue your longstanding trend of working as aggressively as you can in a bipartisan fashion to fund the USGS. We know how hard you've worked in the past to do that, and we appreciate that support. I don't want to go through every aspect of my prepared statement, but just hit on a couple of high points and then hopefully give you a little bit of time back. I'll do my best. One of the things that we really want to stress, and having listened to prior speakers, one of the key and important things with the USGS that I want to reiterate is that it is the Department of Interior's core science agency. It has no regulatory function. It provides science not only to support the decision-making at USGS, but among other government agencies and for other parts of the federal government, state, local, and private decision makers. So in that capacity, it's very unique. It's also a very unique agency in that it has really the only blend of scientific disciplines that we have in the government that sort of span from biology to water to mapping to geoscience, mineralogy, the whole spectrum. And what's really important as we grapple with complex problems like restoration of the Puget Sound or any other area is that these are incredibly complex dynamics anymore, and they require truly interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary perspectives on things. And that's one of the really unique and important aspects of the USGS is its capacity to bring together truly diverse perspectives from across the scientific enterprise to bring biologists and water scientists and geologists together to explore ways to maybe minimize the risk of landslides or the way to remediate landslides or how to ensure invasive species aren't disrupting water supplies or damaging water quality. All those sorts of things that are truly unique at the USGS. And so for those kinds of reasons, it's really become an internationally recognized leading earth and natural science agency. And again, one of the things that we have a little concern with is I think over the course of the last few years as the government, and particularly from an external side looking at USGS, we feel like they've done a lot of hard work at trying to contain spending and be strategic with their investments and manage to the best ability they can to operate with constrained finances. And the concern that we've had, and we know the committee has supported this in the past in terms of trying to help the agency kind of move forward, and we would ask for that again, is it's increasingly important that the scientific workforce at USGS have the opportunity to travel to meetings, engage with colleagues, do those sorts of things that enable them to remain at the frontiers of science and to really advance their research. And so that's something that we hope can continue to be supported as we move forward. One of the other things that we're starting to hear more concern about is, and I think this goes across, again, the agency as a whole, we've heard about sort of civic infrastructure, and I mentioned the concept of scientific infrastructure, and particularly as that relates at USGS. So whether it's scientific collections of biological species or minerals or water or what have you, and the data that's associated with those are incredibly important, and they feed into big data, they feed into Earth data systems and bioinformatics and all these other sorts of things that are really required to develop next generation decision support tools and to inform emergency responders or natural resource managers. There are also things that are often not seen, and so they become harder to keep track of and to support. And so we've just recently, I just ran across a paper by a former USGS employee that was expressing concern about scientific collections specifically at the USGS. And so I think that'd be something that we would hope that the committee might be able to work with the agency on, in terms of making sure that there's proper human and financial resources being brought to bear to maintain that. Because once that data or those specimens are lost, they're gone. And if we can't access them, that's just as bad. So with that, I would just thank you again for your prior support and look forward to working with you in any way we can.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Fritz, you know, back in California, we don't refer to wastewater. We take that out of our vocabulary. Yeah, as a matter of fact, the largest reclamation project in the United States is in Orange County, California, where we take what was wastewater, and we reclaim that water and re-inject it, and over time it is repumped up and used.
Exactly. It's
Because
very
we
important.
can't.
Toilet to tap?
Well, we don't call it that. We call it a larger recirculation system. We don't. We take water from Idaho and use it several times. And Ms. Sahada, you've got not only a great advocate here at the table, Mr. Kilmer, for Puget Sound, but obviously, we hear from Mr. Dix right about this time of year. He's staring at us now, making sure that we don't forget his favorite part of the country, so I'm sure we won't. So with that, and Sharon, wine's a big deal in California. A number of us, I won't get into that, but you're doing good work. And of course, that's it. Yeah, that's a big industry in California. And USGS, you know, those stream monitors and what you're doing on, because we have a real problem in the West on water right now. So your science has been utilized in a number of ways, and we appreciate what you're doing. Ms. McCollum?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I learned a lot about on-site, and I think we need to do a lot about East Coast, West Coast, and the Great Lakes. We need to protect our coastal areas and our largest supply of fresh water, and we will be judged by generations as to how we stood up to this. Deb Schwackheimer is just a real favorite, so thank you for giving the University of Minnesota a shout out. I went to the USGS, and it's just amazing all the work that's going on in there. And when there was a big problem in White Bear Lake, losing water, it was a calm, cool, scientific-based group that kind of came in and found out what was going on, laid out the options, and then walked away and said, okay, you have all the data, you have all the facts, now you figure it out, because they don't do the regulatory. And I think there's things like that that are happening every single day that the USGS is involved in, and we don't know about it, and they're not getting the credit for it, so thank you for being here and speaking up for them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Simpson?
No, Mr. Chairman, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around toilet to tap.
Well, I'll just kind of move on. Mr. Kilmer?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I actually just want to thank Shada for coming and thank my predecessor for both of their hard work on behalf of Puget Sound. It's both really important from a species standpoint, a commerce standpoint, and to families like mine who want to see our kids be able to enjoy that icon. But it's also really sick, and you laid that out, I thought, very well. I'm hopeful that through great advocacy like yours, we'll be able to do right by this effort. And we've got a group called the Puget Sound Recovery Caucus that's also working this, and but certainly appreciate you being here.
Great. Well, we certainly thank this panel for coming, and we appreciate your attendance and your excuse. And we're going to call up the next panel. Mr. Reed Hawley with the Wilderness Land Trust. If you'll sit over here on the right, Reed, that'd be great. Next will be Gary Werner, the Executive Director of the Partnership for the National Trail System. Mr. Tom Coors, Director of the Conservation Finance, U.S. Government Relations and Nature Conservancy. And Mr. Ed Shepard, President of the Public Lands Foundation. All of you, welcome. You probably heard earlier my animation about the 5-minute rule. So green means talk, yellow means finish up, and red means we're done. So I appreciate your coming here. So with that, Reed, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
You might turn your mic on, though. Press that light comes on.
Does that count against my time? Thank you very much, Chairman Calvert, Mr. Kilmer, Mr. Simpson. It's a pleasure to speak with you today. My name is Reed Howie. I'm president of the Wilderness Land Trust. We're a small nonprofit that works around the country to facilitate the acquisition of private lands that exist within designated and proposed wilderness areas from willing sellers to the federal government. We've been doing this for about 23 years, and we're not here today to ask you for more or to put more burden on the federal government, but are hoping that you'll take the opportunity to create a situation where the federal government will have to do less. The committee has shown steadfast support over many years for the inholding accounts within the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and we're hoping that you all will continue to show support for those accounts. A modest appropriation of between $3 and $5 million per agency in those accounts goes a long way towards creating efficiencies and completing wilderness areas. We ask that you continue to do that because such appropriations save the federal government money, solves management issues, helps private landowners who oftentimes feel trapped within these wilderness areas, and creates access and economic development opportunities. So you might ask, why worry? 2014 was the 50th anniversary of the Wilderness Act, and in honor of that, we did an inventory of all of the private lands within the National Wilderness Preservation System. As it turns out, there are 175,000 acres of private lands within designated wilderness in the lower 48. That's a fairly big number, but it's a significant improvement over the over 400,000 acres that were in the system when we started our work a number of years ago. So this small and this modest and continual funding has been very helpful at reducing that issue and helping those landowners out. But how does it save the federal government money? One example is fire. The Western Forestry Leadership Coalition published a study in 2009 on the cost of fighting wildfires in the West. What it found was that wildfires that were fought where there were private lands present within the federal estate were exponentially more expensive than those that were where those private lands didn't exist. It ranged from the least expensive fire was $411 per acre. There were only 6 private parcels within that fire, to one that was up over $22,000 an acre, where there was 600 private parcels within that fire. And we've been on both sides of this issue in that the Wilderness Land Trust at one time owned a parcel within the Yoloboli Wilderness in California that while it was still privately owned by us and not at our request, it was caught in the North Pass fire and firefighting efforts occurred. A significant amount of money, time, and risk was put into saving the structures that were on that property unsuccessfully, but the effort was made nonetheless. On the other hand, a property that we owned and transferred to federal ownership in the Hells Canyon Wilderness in Idaho, 1 week before it burned, no one cared. There was no firefighting effort made on that property. It was done out on the wildland-urban interface where it should be, and the costs were significantly less. So another project that we're currently working on is in the Castle Crags Wilderness in California, which is only about 2 miles off of Interstate 5. But it's a 7 or 8 mile hike to get there because intervening between the wilderness and the interstate are 2 sections of private land. We've acquired them from Roseburg Lumber when it went through an intergenerational change and wanted to reassess where its assets were. We stepped in to acquire that and are now in the process of transferring that to federal ownership to create access to some world-class climbing that's in the Castle Crags, very much like Yosemite, as well as all the recreational benefits that can be there. The community of Dunsmuir is very excited because they see it as an economic development opportunity to have access to that resource next to their hard-hit community from high unemployment rates. So we ask that you continue to support, as the committee has steadfastly supported in the past, these modest appropriations on an annual basis into the in-holding accounts of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And with that, I'll answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Gary Werner, the Partnership for the National Trail System. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, we got handouts.
Members of the committee. My name's Gary Werner, and I'm here today representing the 35 nonprofit organizations that work in partnership with the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, and the Bureau of Land Management to sustain the 30 congressionally authorized national scenic trails, including the North Country National Scenic Trail in Minnesota, the Pacific Crest National Scenic Trail, and the Juan Bautista de Anza and California National Historic Trails in California, and about half a dozen more in Idaho across the northern part of the country. I am here happily to report to you that our commitment to the long-term partnership of citizen stewardship of these trails remains strong. Once again, in 2014, we documented well over 1 million hours of volunteer labor contributed on behalf of the trails. The value of that labor, along with financial contributions made by the organizations, amounted to some $35 million, which is about $9 million more than was appropriated for the 3 agencies to administer and manage these trails in that year. I want to remind you that the National Scenic and Historic Trails provide access for outdoor recreation. They specifically provide access to more than 80 national parks, 70 national wildlife refuges, more than 120 wilderness areas, and at the same time, they also provide opportunities for healthful outdoor recreation in 100 of the major metropolitan areas of the country. However, these trails are still works in progress. Only 1 or 2 of them can be considered complete. The National Scenic Trails, which are intended to be continuous travelways, only 1 of them really is complete. There are many sites along the National Historic Trails that are still yet to be preserved and to be interpreted. You can appreciate, in spite of what my colleague over here mentioned, that wilderness areas and parks and refuges can function with gaps or holes or inholdings in them. But trails with gaps, trails that are intended to be access ways, can't function with gaps. And so we've got plenty of gaps to fill in the National Scenic and Historic Trails. So I'm asking you to increase the investment that Congress is making in this national system in 2 significant ways. One, by providing more operating funding for the 3 agencies so that we can better maintain the trails that we have and build new sections of trail. And I'm specifically asking for $16 million for the 23 trails that are administered by the National Park Service. I'm asking for a total of about $70 million for the National Conservation Lands System in the Bureau of Land Management. The National Scenic and Historic Trails are units of that system, and $9 million for those trails, and a total of $90 million for the trails account for the U.S. Forest Service, of which we would like $9.3 million for the National Scenic and Historic Trails, administered and managed by the Forest Service. Secondly, asking you to once again find a way with your colleagues in the Senate to appropriate as much money for the Land and Water Conservation Fund as possible. We fully support the President's intent to fully fund Land and Water at $90 million. We do greatly appreciate that you appropriated $306 million for 2015, including $28 million for projects along National Scenic and Historic Trails, and we're asking you for 2016 to, among other things, appropriate $66 million of the National Trails System Collaborative Landscape Planning proposal for 48 projects along 14 of the trails. Trails in each of your two states, Mr. Chair and Mr. Simpson. Unfortunately, we don't have a project in Minnesota, Ms. McCollum, but we do have one along the North Country Trail. So we thank you very much for your support over the years. We also have in the testimony some help we need with the Bureau of Land Management budget.
I thank the gentleman. I'm looking at the Lewis and Clark Trail. I think the full committee chairman has indicated interest in that going through Kentucky for some reason. So I just point that out. Next, Mr. Coors, welcome.
Thank you.
Recognized.
Chairman Calvert, Ranking Member McCollum, Mr. Simpson, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you here today. My name is Tom Coors. I'm the Director of Conservation and Finance for the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy is an international nonprofit conservation organization working around the world to protect ecologically important lands and waters for nature and people. Our mission is to conserve the lands and waters upon which all life depends. We're on the ground in all 50 states. We are a nonpartisan, science-based, trusted convener with over 1 million members. We appreciate this subcommittee's work for the FY15 levels for the Department of Interior and also the U.S. Forest Service. As we enter another challenging fiscal year, the Conservancy recognizes the subcommittee's difficult choices ahead. We recommend funding levels largely consistent with FY15. Please refer to my written testimony for more of the specifics on those programs and levels. Overall, we look forward to working with this subcommittee and the authorizing committees on identifying permanent funding solutions for Wildfire, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, Payment in lieu of taxes, and the Secure Rural Schools programs. Creating permanent solutions for these programs will create budgetary stability and accountability while liberating critically needed appropriations funds within the Interior allocation. Polls still show that conservation is strongly supported by the vast majority of the public in both parties and all regions of the country. I'd like to focus on the Land and Water Conservation Fund. It has worked extremely well for 50 years, protecting the best of America. From Gettysburg in Pennsylvania to the Tetons in Wyoming to Cape Hatteras and the Blue Ridge Parkway in my home state of North Carolina, it is due to expire in September. We need a legislative solution. With regard to its annual appropriation, the President's budget includes $400 million for LWCF through discretionary appropriations and an additional $500 million in mandatory funding. We look forward to working with you and supporting an appropriation of at a minimum $400 million for LWCF and to legislatively fix the diversion of LWCF funds. We need to ensure this program continues and is honestly budgeted for the next 50 years. Next, I'd like to focus on wildland fire management. The Wildfire Disaster Funding Act must be passed prior to an FY16 appropriations package to adequately fund suppression and to provide flexibility in funding the activities that reduce fire risk and long-term suppression costs. The Conservancy greatly appreciates the committee's support of this much-needed fire funding fix. The Conservancy also appreciates Congress's emphasis on proactive hazardous fuels reduction and community preparedness. In light of this approach and through enactment of WDFA, the Conservancy recommends investing in hazardous fuels at $479 million and $178 million for the U.S. Forest Service and DOI respectively, as well as repeating the FY 12 instructions for allocating funds to priority landscapes in both the wildland-urban interface and wildland settings. Also, the Conservancy recommends increasing funding for the Collaborative Landscape Forest Restoration Program to $60 million. This important program works to restore large forest landscapes to provide jobs that sustain rural economies, to reduce wildfire risks, and to improve wildlife habitat by decommissioning unused damaging roads. On sage grouse, the Conservancy supports the administration's $45 million request for BLM's Greater Sage Grouse Conservation Strategy, which supports the work that must be done to recover this important species and habitat without the necessity of listing under the Endangered Species Act. These efforts are more than just about grouse. They will protect elk, mule deer, and pronghorn sheep and a western way of life, including $1 billion in recreation activity on BLM-managed sagebrush lands. In conclusion, what this subcommittee funds is timeless and true. American people value nature and all that it provides to them. Thank you for my time to speak before you today.
Thank you, gentlemen. Next, Mr. Shepard, you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member McCollum, and members of the subcommittee, my name is Ed Shepard, and I'm the president of the Public Lands Foundation. We want to thank you for this opportunity to present the subcommittee with our views regarding the Bureau of Land Management's budget request for FY 2016. The PLF, as retired BLM employees, supports the BLM and its programs, but we are independent in our views and our requests. The BLM manages the most diverse landscape in the nation's portfolio, providing stewardship to approximately 247 million acres of land and 700 million acres of mineral estate. These lands provide many social, ecological, and economic benefits to the people of the United States, and they are economically important to the United States as a whole, providing combined revenues of $107 billion and over 446,000 jobs. These lands are absolutely vital to the many rural communities throughout the West that are intermixed with these lands. However, these uses and values can only be achieved when there is some balance in the programs to provide for the diversity of uses and maintenance of healthy, resilient landscapes, and the PLF believes that this budget strives to meet that balance. We support the request for the all-of-the-above approach to provide vital energy needs from traditional and renewable energy sources, including the infrastructure, the pipelines and power lines to deliver this energy. We believe it can contribute significantly to the country's energy independence. We also support the BLM's request for Congress to charter a national BLM foundation, as it has for other land and resource management agencies. Such a foundation would partner the BLM with the public to bring in key resources and partnerships to assist the BLM in the management of these lands. The BLM proposes a $5 million increase to fund BLM's part in engaging the Next Generation program. PLF has done a lot of work also in youth, in bringing new folks into the workforce and to get them engaged in the outdoors, and I believe that this is a good way to go. And we're also pleased that that proposal includes veterans. Experience has shown that hiring veterans into the organization, they come in with the leadership and team working skills that allows them to go right to work, and they can contribute greatly to the agency, and it's also a way of recognizing the contribution that they've made to the country. The BLM has been working with other federal and state wildlife agencies across the West to develop and implement conservation plans for managing the sage steppe ecosystem to conserve the greater sage grouse. The BLM has proposed a $45 million increase to implement projects that would maintain and restore resilient sage steppe habitat. We support this request, and we're concerned that should the sage grouse be listed under the Endangered Species Act, a lot of the agency's resources would go into the process requirements of the ESA and not into necessary work on the ground to restore habitat. And this would have severe economic consequences to the rural communities and impact the nation's capabilities to produce energy resources, while at the same time doing very little to improve the plight of the sage grouse. The PLF, while supportive of the increase to restore the sage steppe ecosystem, is concerned that at the same time the BLM is proposing that they're proposing a $6.9 million decrease to the Western Oregon O&C budget. This decrease will reduce capabilities to provide balanced management between timber and other forest resources. Many areas in the Northwest are in need of projects to improve forest health and resiliency, and we do not believe that shifting funds from one high priority area at the cost of another high priority area is wise, and we request the subcommittee to restore the $6.9 million to the O&C. No BLM issue receives more passionate input from the public than the Wild Horse and Burro program. The BLM continues to be stymied in finding a solution to the horse population problem that the public will accept. The budget proposes a modest $2.9 million increase and only remove 2,000 head from the range, and this will only lead to further soil, water, and vegetation damage. And we support a lot of the work the BLM is doing with the National Academy of Sciences and some other efforts, but believe that it's going to take more than the BLM can do under the law, and we hope that Congress will be involved in that. And finally, as my colleagues on the panel, we are concerned about wildfire funding, and we support the department's wild and fire proposal and the way they propose to fund it, and it goes hand in glove with the Wildfire Disaster Funding Act, and we support passage of that or simple legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Shepard. We appreciate this panel coming here. I was surprised there's still 175,000 acres within the wilderness areas. I know it was a significant number a number of years ago when I first was on the Resource Committee 23 years ago when you guys were first starting out. So you have accomplished more than half, I guess, of the acquisitions within of these in-holdings. The folks that are left, are they that patient or are they upset? I suspect it's the latter.
It's hard to characterize their emotional state, but what we have found is that there's a very predictable 3 to 5% of the universe of these properties that come on the market in any one year. That translates to about once a generation. So it's quite easy to come to the conclusion that people make a go at it with these properties, and then when a generational change, which has been our experience, comes along, they oftentimes come on the market. So it's important for all of us to be there when that event occurs, not necessarily to go through a very large funding effort, but a small, steady set of funds.
I know many times you're the only real buyer of this property. In some cases, this land is landlocked, isn't it?
Some cases it is, but wilderness isn't zoning. So all of the private lands that are within wilderness are governed by county zoning regulations. If the property had access when the wilderness was designated, it still has access.
Mr. Warner, obviously the trail system is very popular in the United States, and I know this committee has supported it in the past, and I'm sure we'll do the best we can in the future based upon our budget realities. And I know there's a lot of discussion about the Land and Water Conservation Fund and pilt, of course, Secure Rural Schools. Obviously, there's support here. We have, as you know, reached out to. We need to get a funding mechanism with the authorizing committees you need to be working with, and we pay the bills here. So that's a policy determination that needs to be worked out. If we can work that out, that would be helpful. And of course, I'm sitting next to the author of the Wildfire bill, so I'm sure he's interested in its passage also. Yeah, and Mr. Shepard, you mentioned a couple of hot topics around here. Sage grouse is obviously one of the hottest, and BLM is a big part of that because they're, in many respects, the largest landlord out there.
It's over 50% of the habitat.
Yeah, over 50% of the land, so they've got to be a good steward of the property also. We do not want to see the sage grouse listed. I mean, that would be, we are putting the resources in that. That would be devastating to the economy in the West, and so I hope we can do everything we can to keep that from happening. I know the wild horse and burro issue is an emotional issue, but we're spending a lot of money on that, $80 million, and we've got to find a better way to sterilize, neuter these horses, have them adopted, and work with every organization we can to do that because it's a growing problem. somewhat, yes. So that, Ms. McCollum?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Shepherd, you kind of gave a sneak preview of what I was going to talk to the committee about tomorrow, and that's the BLM Foundation idea. I'm very intrigued by that, and I think that that's something that we could use to raise awareness and to move forward on the wild horse and burro issue, too. I think that lends itself a really good partnership. I do have, for everybody up here, I'm big supporters of everything that you do, but I do have a question for Mr. Warner. So I'm looking at the National Historic Trails, and as you said, Minnesota doesn't have one, nor do 10 states that go along the Mississippi River. And there's the Mississippi Parkway Commission, which I used to be a member on when I was a state legislature. And I know that they're looking at doing connections. They have maps. There's been talk in the past about kind of not creating a new trail, but linking the trail systems that are down there. I mean, it qualifies for all kinds of things. Exploration, right? Trade, communications, military action, and they are linked together by an auto tour route. So maybe at some point we can visit about. I don't want to do something the Parkway Commission isn't interested in, but I know in the past that they've been interested in things, and when it came to working on even preserving or fighting Asian carp together, that was one of the commissions that came together on it. So I'd like to maybe learn a little more, and I'll talk to the commission. They're in St. Cloud, Minnesota, I think, in April. I'll try to talk to them as well, too.
I think what you're describing, the way I understand it, several years ago, I knew there were people involved in a number of the states from Minnesota all the way down to Louisiana doing just what you were talking about, linking together what they were calling a Mississippi River Trail.
Right.
And I know there were several people like Mark Ackelman from the Iowa.
I was working on that with
Iowa
them.
Natural Heritage Foundation was one of the leaders of that. And I assume that effort is ongoing. The difference, obviously, between that effort on the local basis and the National Scenic and Historic Trails are the National Scenic and Historic Trails have to be authorized by you folks, by Congress.
Right.
And you're right. I mean, in noting most of the a large portion of the Lewis and Clark Trail route, but except for that wonderful portion that goes through Idaho, is a water route. And the Captain John Smith National Historic Trail is a water route. So, if someone wanted to do something as, recognizing the history of the Mississippi River, in terms of exploration, in terms of commerce and things like that, it could qualify, I would think, as a National Historic Trail.
It's like all the loose pearls in your grandmother's jewelry box that you discovered, but they're not strung together.
Right.
And so they're there. So we'll talk more about it later. Thank you. This is great, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson.
Just thank you for your support for the wildfire fighting bill that needs to get done. We've got to find a better way to budget for wildfires to make sure that we don't strip every other account in order to fight wildfires, because it's damaging and causing catastrophic fires in the future, because we're not spending money where we appropriate money. So I appreciate your support for that, and Ed, if you can ever find an answer to the wild horse and burro program. I'm glad that, when I moved over to Energy and Water and Ken took over at Interior, it's the one thing I was glad at is that he has the wild horse and burro problem now. I thought if there was some way we could just separate the stallions and the mares. I know this would work out. Sell the stallions to Wyoming and the mares to Nevada. But we spend a lot of money there.
Got a lot of money.
We need to find a way to get back. Well, thanks to this panel. We appreciate your attendance.
We strongly support your bill, too.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that leadership.
You bet.
Okay, our next panel is Mr. Scott Steen, President and CEO of American Forest. Could sit over here on my right. That would be great. And then Tom Parton, the Federal Forest Resource Coalition, right next door. And then Mr. Clark Seeley, Society of American Foresters. And Mr. Jim Carls, President of the National Association of State Foresters. Welcome. You probably heard me about it. I'll do it again. 5-minute rule. Green means talk. Yellow means wrap it up, and red means we're over. So I appreciate if you stay within those boundaries. And with that, we appreciate your being here. And Mr. Steen, you're recognized.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member McCollum, and Mr. Simpson. My name is Scott Steen. I'm President and CEO of American Forests. I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to present our fiscal year 2016 appropriations recommendations. Founded in 1875, American Forests is the oldest national nonprofit conservation organization in the U.S. Our mission is to restore threatened forest ecosystems and inspire people to value and protect urban and wildland forests. During the last 140 years, American Forest has served as a catalyst for many of the most important milestones in the conservation movement, including the founding of the U.S. Forest Service, the Conservation Corps, the National Park System, and the growth of the urban forestry movement. American Forest continues to be one of the nation's leading advocates for the stewardship and expansion of urban tree canopy and green space, and a key funder of urban forest initiatives that have transformed communities across the country. When most people think of forests, they think of rural wilderness areas. But the reality is that nearly 80% of our nation's population live in urban forested ecosystems. Our goal is to help cities of all sizes create communities that seamlessly link the natural and the built environments. The components of urban forest ecosystems, parks, gardens, urban farms, street trees and plants, recreational spaces, waterways, and other features work together to make cities more livable, sustainable, and resilient. When done consciously, they also create demand for green-collar jobs in a sector poised for rapid expansion. The Urban and Community Forestry Program within the U.S. Forest Service is the key federal program to deliver technical, financial, educational, and research assistance to communities nationwide. In 2014, UNCF's work benefited more than 7,100 communities and more than 190 million people, approximately 60% of the U.S. population. But the ability to do this important work is diminished as this program is continually proposed to be cut. The program received its highest level of funding in FY 2012, and even at that level was a modest investment when compared to the benefits the program generates. While we appreciate the FY 2015 enacted amount was higher than the President's request, we urge this committee to return UNCF to the already modest FY 12 amount of $31.3 million. With regard to our nation's broader conservation efforts, we have been encouraged by the Forest Service's most recent interest in accelerating the pace of forest restoration on our national forests. With 65 to 80 million acres in need of restoration, this will be no small feat. The Forest Service's Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program is one of the most important programs to further this work. This program was created in 2009 to promote job stability, reliable wood supply, and forest health, while reducing emergency wildfire costs and risks. In the first 5 years, projects funded through CFLRP have reduced hazardous fuels on more than 945,000 acres to protect communities, made nearly 2 million green tons of biomass available for bioenergy production, and enhanced habitat on 703 miles of streams. American Forest supports the recommendation to increase program funding to $60 million. We deeply appreciate this committee's support of the sensible, bipartisan Wildfire Disaster Funding Act, and respectfully request the language be highlighted in the FY 2016 Interior, Environment, and Related Agencies Appropriations Bill. This would provide the U.S. Forest Service and the Department of Interior with a funding structure similar to that used by other agencies that respond to natural disaster emergencies. We are prepared to help in any way possible to assist Congress in developing a sustainable and long-term solution to funding emergency wildfire suppression. Thank you for the opportunity to provide some insight into these programs, and I appreciate your consideration of my testimony.
Next, Mr. Parton.
Good afternoon, Chairman Calvert and Ranking Member McCollum
and Representative Simpson. It's a pleasure to be back. I had the opportunity to testify before this group about 3 years ago when you were chairman. Again, I'm back to talk about federal forest issues, both Forest Service and BLM. But today I'm testifying on behalf of the Federal Forest Resource Coalition. We're a fairly new organization formed in Washington, D.C. in the last 3 years. We represent purchasers of federal timber in 32 states with over 650 member companies and collectively representing over 390,000 employees. We make the following specific programmatic recommendations for fiscal year 2016 Forest Service budget. First of all, we need to focus increased investments on our National Forest Timber Management Program and the capital improvement and maintenance. Secondly, we need to maintain strong funding for wildland hazardous fuels reduction. We cannot get to managing the needed acres without appropriations to do the job on the ground or treat our hazardous fuels and a road system to get them out. So those are very important first steps. FFRC applauds the administration's budget for proposing to increase timber outputs to 3.2 billion board feet. I think last year they were at about 2.8 billion board feet. And we endorse a bipartisan approach to wildfire funding and the Wildfire Disaster Funding Act, H.R. 167. Our mills need predictable and growing supplies of timber. Over the past 2 decades, harvest levels on our federal forests have been reduced by 80%. Inadequate and unpredictable timber supplies caused by erratic appropriations, fire borrowing, and obstructionist tactics by a minority of radical groups make it difficult to commit to investments needed to keep our companies viable. It also threatens the health of our forests without having a consistent flow of wood. We need certainty. We strongly encourage you to eliminate the fire borrowing and to provide stable appropriations through bipartisan efforts like the Wildfire Disaster Funding Act. We also stress that the Forest Service performance has been hampered in previous years by erratic appropriations. And I've seen it firsthand on the ground. When we go out and we ask what the Forest Service's program is, they don't get a budget oftentimes until April. And this is a time when they're taking a chance on should we hire summer folks, should we not hire summer folks. And we need to have some predictability to these folks and pass your budgets early in the year so they know what's going to happen. We've had continuing resolutions that's gone in a short time. Back in 2013, we had a government shutdown, and at that time we had 1,200 active timber sales that was shut down and really impacted our operations nationwide. As you know, the National Forest System is experiencing significant forest health challenges. I think Chief Tidwell testified that the National Forests have between 65 and 82 million acres of land that needs active management. Further, the Forest Service has $5.1 billion capital facilities maintenance backlogs with all of the road systems and buildings and everything else that they haven't been able to keep up. In 2012, the administration publicly committed to increasing the pace and scale of managing our National Forest System, and we applaud the 2016 budget request for attempting to translate that commitment into action. However, we think there are some improvements that the committee could take to more direct these dollars and put towards specific actions, including a 5% increase in the forest products line item to $355 million. This is an increase of $16 million. A 5% increase in the Forest Roads Fund to $176 million, an increase of $8.4 million. And support a 4 billion board foot timber goal. I think there's ways you could get to that 4 billion board foot timber goal from the 3.2 that you're predicting, with some emphasis on management and some cost-saving areas. I also want to touch real briefly on the BLM forest management. Mr. Shepard, of course, was highly involved in that over his years. It's showing a 9.1% reduction this year. Out in Oregon, of course, we have the ONC lands that are very important. That's about a 215 million foot program, and we really don't need a reduction in our BLM funding out there. So really encourage you to take a look at those dollars and try to put them, I think it's $9.9 million back into the budget. FFRC represents all the states where we have federal timber, including Alaska. Alaska is being really challenged right now. The timber industry in Alaska faces several problems, and current efforts to transition to a second growth timber, which is really where they're headed, has caused some problems. We're emphasizing that some portions of the Tongass should be converted into state ownership in order to meet the needs of the local economy up in Alaska. And I just want to take a couple of seconds. It's probably the last time I'm going to testify here because I'm going to be retiring. But I think we've really shorted our federal forests and we've shorted our rural communities by not managing our forests and getting the returns back to the communities and counties that they need. So please remember that when you're putting your budget together, and we appreciate all your help.
Thank you, and I hope you enjoy your retirement.
Well, semi.
Mr. Seeley, you're recognized.
Good afternoon, Chairman Calvert, Ranking Member McCollum, Congressman Simpson. I am Clark Seeley, and I'm the current Vice President of the Society of American Foresters. I've been a professional forester and a member of SAF for 38 years, and I have experience in natural resource management and organizational leadership. I'd like to thank the committee and thank the chairman for the opportunity to share testimony on behalf of SAF for fiscal year 2016 appropriations. The Society of American Foresters, founded in 1900 with 12,000 professionals representing all disciplines within the profession, promotes science-based, sustainable management and stewardship of the nation's public and private forests. Our members include natural resource professionals as practitioners in private and public settings, researchers, administrators, educators, and students. We're eager to work with Congress, with federal agencies and partners to identify reasonable solutions to facilitate increasing the pace and scale of management on federal lands, in addition to finding new ways to work with private landowners to reduce the barriers they face, keeping forests as forests, and promoting active management. Summarizing my written testimony, I'd like to focus my comments today on two of SAF's 2016 priorities: addressing the multifaceted wildfire challenge and strong support for the Forest Service research and development programs. I'll begin with wildfire. While significant wildfires predominantly threaten local landscapes and communities, the financial impacts weigh heavily on our whole nation. All agencies and programs funded through the Interior's Appropriations bill are at risk as wildfire suppression costs continue to rise under the current model. Relying on transfers from vital forest management programs and after-the-fact supplementals and repayments is neither fiscally responsible nor sustainable. Without swift action towards a long-term solution, U.S. Forest Service and DOI resources will continue to be drained by wildfire, and the agencies will be unable to successfully achieve land management objectives that are fundamental to the future of our forests. SAF appreciates the subcommittee's support for the Bipartisan Wildfire Disaster Funding Act and respectfully asks it to include similar language in the FY 2016 House Appropriations bill. A comprehensive approach to averting wildfire threats and improve forest resilience is imperative. The hazardous fuels and fire risk management line items in the U.S. Forest Service and DOI budgets are vital to restoring forest health and reducing the costs of wildfire suppression. SAF appreciates this subcommittee's consistent support for wildfire management and encourages it to allocate funds to address wildfire risks inside and outside the wildland-urban interface. In addition to preventing and mitigating wildfire risk, these programs also serve as an important source of jobs, especially in rural communities. SAF supports funding the hazardous fuels line item in the Forest Service budget at $360 million, with additional funds available in the National Forest System budget to support the landscape scale approach, and funding for the DOI Fire Risk Management Program at $178 million. Now let me turn to research and development. Investments in forestry research are essential for the future health and sustainability of our nation's forests. U.S. Forest Service R&D functions as an incubator for new products and ideas, conducting essential research on such key topics as natural disturbances, contributions of forest to air and water quality, species and forest resilience, treatment methods for controlling forest insects, diseases, and invasive species, renewable energy development, and woody biomass conversion technology. SAF is concerned that forestry research capacity in the United States continues to decline, threatening our competitiveness and the ability of forest managers to meet tomorrow's challenges with current science and technical information. We acknowledge that the agency needs to clarify the Forest Service R&D strategic priorities, and we pledge to work with the agency, stakeholders, and this subcommittee to encourage the development of research portfolios at the stations around the country to align with the identified priorities. But further reductions in the Forest Service R&D budget will create significant gaps in the knowledge base necessary to address the many threats facing our nation's forests and competitive losses in the global economy. SAF supports a funding level of $226 million for U.S. Forest Service R&D, with particular emphasis on prioritizing research efforts and transferring knowledge to forestry professionals. SAF also strongly supports the funding increase suggested for the Forest Service R&D Forest Inventory and Analysis, or FIA, program, and encourages this subcommittee to also provide a significant boost in funding for the program. FIA is the inventory backbone of U.S. forestry, providing the only national census of all forests across all ownerships, and is unique in that all professional foresters, either directly or indirectly, use its information at some point in their careers. SAF requests funding at a level of at least $83 million and urges this subcommittee to provide direction for future increases to allow the program to keep pace with ever-growing information needs. In closing, thank you for your time and consideration of these important requests. SAF and its extensive network of forestry and natural resource professionals stand ready to assist with further development and implementation of these efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Carls. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Calvert and Ranking Member McCollum, Representative Simpson, for the opportunity to testify before the subcommittee this afternoon. My name is Jim Carls. I'm the Florida State Forester, as well as the President of the National Association of State Foresters, NASF. Today, I'd like to highlight NASF's fiscal year 16 appropriations request for state and private forestry programs and for the State Fire Assistance Program. As stewards of more than two-thirds of America's 751 million acres of forest, state foresters provide technical and financial assistance along with forest health, water, and fire protection for our nation's private forest lands. The states work closely with USDA Forest Service to deliver state and private forestry programs. These programs leverage resources to protect and sustainably manage our non-federal lands. My written statement includes a complete set of priority recommendations from NASF, and I'll highlight a few. Forest Health Cooperative Lands Program, which supports work to contain and eradicate harmful species and pests that are already costing cities billions of dollars. We ask for the support of the Forest Health Cooperative Lands Program at $48 million for fiscal year 2016. Urban and Community Forest Program provides technical and financial assistance to promote stewardship of our urban forest in communities across this country. We ask for support of the UCF program at $31 million. Forest Inventory and Analysis Program is a comprehensive forest inventory system in the United States for assessing the health and the sustainability of our nation's forests. We ask for the support of the FIA program at $83 million. The Forest Stewardship Program is a program that provides boots on the ground, technical assistance for families and individuals who own private forest lands. This program is delivered through state forestry agencies and directed by the Cooperative Forestry Assistance Act. The program works to ensure that the private landowners have the resources to best manage their lands for wildlife, for recreation, for aesthetics, for timber production, and for other goals. NASF continues to work with partners and the Forest Service to improve the program, to provide better ways to measure the outcomes, to improve cost effectiveness, and to impact greater number of landowners and acres. We ask for your support of the Forest Stewardship Program at $29 million. Next, I'll touch a little on the Landscape Scale Restoration Program. We appreciate the continued support of the subcommittee for this program and for the State Forest Action Plans. State Forest Action Plans are the first ever attempt to create plans covering all forest resources in a state, federal, state, and private, to ensure long-term sustainability, which is critical to clean air, to water, to forest products, and to jobs. All states now have all states in the country now have USDA-approved forest action plans, and the LSR program is targeted at helping states implement work outlined in these forest action plans. State foresters working with the Forest Service and our partners would like to grow the LSR program to better support implementation of these forest action plans. We ask for your support of the Landscape Scale Restoration line item at $23.5 million. State Fire Assistance Program is the key federal program for for assisting states and local fire departments in mitigating and responding to wildfires. State Fire Assistance directs resources to treat fuels and the fire threat on non-federal lands to reduce the risk to communities, to residents, to property, and to our firefighters from wildfire events. State Fire Assistance does three very important things. One, it provides fire assistance or funding assistance which is matched at least on a one-to-one basis for hazardous fuel treatments on non-federal lands. It helps communities prepare for and mitigate the risk of wildfire through tools such as the Community Wildfire Protection Plans. With more than 70,000 communities listed at risk across the country from wildfire, much work remains to be done in that regard. And State Fire Assistance also helps to equip and train local fire responders, first responders, who are often the first ones to respond to a wildfire regardless of the jurisdiction, whether it be local, state, or federal. Please remember, the State Fire Assistance is the primary federal mechanism to help communities prepare for wildfire. We ask your support for the State Fire Assistance Program in fiscal year 16 at $86 million. In closing, I'd like to thank the subcommittee again, as the rest have, for Wildfire Disaster Funding Act in support of it. This legislation, Chairman, as you said, is critical to stop the cycle of the transfers, to allow us to get the mitigation work done ahead of time to reduce not only the threat of wildfires, but the cost of wildfires. Thank you, Chairman Calvert. Thank you, Ranking Member McCollum, Representative Simpson, and any opportunities for questions, we're happy to respond.
Thank you, and thank all of you for your testimony. I heard all of you talk about the problem with wildfire, and I'm sure Mr. Simpson heard that. I'm sure that he would not oppose if you and your members contacted members of Congress throughout the country, and if they're not on Mr. Simpson's bill, I'm sure he'd welcome their assistance in getting on the bill. Because I don't know how many co-sponsors we have right now, but it's a pretty good number.
It is right now,
But
over 200, yeah.
Yeah, the more the better, and because around here, as you know, numbers matter. So that would be helpful. One thing, Mr. Parton, I've been around for a while, and I remember years ago, 20-some years ago, when we had the issues with the spotted owl in the west, and a lot of land throughout the west was put off of cultivation because I believe an overzealous number of folks and made mistakes. Now we have a situation where in many of these areas trees are overgrown. We have too many trees per acre. The drought obviously is hitting the state of California. Bark beetle is devastating for us on federal lands throughout the west. And the problem I can see is that you mentioned, certainty, and if you're a businessman, I used to be one of those, and you want to, if you're going to spend a significant amount of capital putting up a new mill, you want to make sure that you have some kind of reliable partner.
Exactly. Yep.
And the United States government has not been a reliable partner in the past. So I hope that is going to change. And that we can have a responsible timber operation which employs, as you mentioned, hundreds of thousands of people in the United States, provides valuable timber for the people in this country, and it's a valuable resource that we need to take advantage of, and obviously in the right way. Ms. McCollum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, two of my nieces are foresters.
Good.
So we like the forests. And in Minnesota, we're seeing two things kind of happen at the same time: the impacts of climate change. Our DNR in the 1992, when I was on the Environment Ag Committee back home, they took us out to Itasca and walked us through what would happen with the degree change, and they were spot on. And we've got gypsy moth and bark beetle and Asian ash borer and all of that kind of converging at one time. So I appreciate your comments on R&D, and I'd like to know maybe if there's spots that we should be looking in the ag bill to make sure that doesn't get cut, because you kind of have a foot in each bill. to make sure what happens, because I was at the St. Paul campus at the University of Minnesota, and some of that's ag and some of it's forest, and so help me sort that out so that I can be an advocate on those dollars too and try to watch them. And I appreciate what you said about public and private, and you know, in the cities, in the Twin Cities with Asian ash borer, it is public and private. It's the municipalities, it's the private landowners, you know, who own houses, and that. We're all working together to identify that, because if we can kill it, keep it, retain it, whatever in the Twin Cities, and keep it from going up north, we're all in it together. So I think, you know, some of the concerns I have on urban forestry just isn't that I want to have, you know, a shady lane to walk down. We're also, the forestry is an important part of our economy. So those of us in the Twin Cities, we don't want it spreading up north for lots of reasons, but for the health and well-being of our forests, not only for enjoyment, but for economy's sake. So thank you for your questions to us about us doing a better job about being more timely and getting our homework done here. It's really important we do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, panel? Thank you very much for attending. We appreciate your testimony, and have a great day.
Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. And we're on to our final panel. I'm sure that folks have been waiting here for a while, so I appreciate getting up here. Mr. Corbin Newman is going to be here on my right, and next to Mr. John McKenna. Corbin Newman is with the National Association of Forest Service Retirees. And we just met somebody who's going to retire here pretty soon, so you're going to have an addition. And Mr. John McKenna is the Recreational Aviation Foundation from Idaho.
He's from Montana.
Montana.
They
It
did
says
the
right
same
here,
thing,
it says Idaho.
Well, that just says Idaho Simpson, but
Oh.
Simpson is from Idaho.
Oh, okay.
McKenna is from Montana.
All right. It's a confusing thing. With that, Mr. Newman, you're recognized for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking member, and members of the committee. I'll tell Tom that he can retire, but he can't run away. I currently serve as the executive director of this association, which is basically a sister one of Ed Shepard's BLM retirees organization, except with the Forest Service. And I retired 2 years ago and found myself doing this again, simply because we care so much about it. Having spent some time in the Southwest as a regional forester with the U.S. Forest Service before I retired, I came up close and personal with the conditions of our landscapes as well as the fires that we're seeing scattered across the West. And wanted to share just a few points with you because I fully appreciate we stand between you all and adjournment. And as you can see, the room is emptied out. When we look at the condition of national forests, our organization, which is made up of a group of individuals that have over 20,000 years of experience managing natural resource and conducting research, care deeply about the conditions that we're seeing. As you all know, those systems are live, they grow, they age, and they die. I worked in both the East and the West. I worked in Minnesota and Michigan, Wisconsin, as well as across the West. And we see that our forests and our grasslands are aging, and the effects aren't just fire. They come from the intrusion of people building into those that are affecting those systems. We face our ultimate change with the changing of our environment, regardless of the cause that's being reflected in those natural systems that's causing a need to really take active management approaches to addressing those impacts. I want to thank Representative Simpson for, as others did, for the WDFA. It's one of those critical first steps in beginning to move us into an environment where wildfire is known as a disaster, that it's funded appropriately, but more than anything, to minimize impacts to those programs that are extremely necessary in order to get ahead of these wildfires that we've been faced with. As we look at what that step might do, we're encouraged with the general support we've always gotten from the Appropriations Committee. I spent 8 years here in D.C. in our national headquarters doing National Forest System budget, which I spent a lot of time with the staff of this subcommittee at one time. We fully understand the challenges that you have. We will not be talking numbers with you in our written testimony. It just suggests some areas of priority. For me, it is critically important that this subcommittee support and help move forward the Wildfire Disaster Funding Act. It is the first step in minimizing those impacts of those programs related to the restoration of these systems. But I think the committee, we look for your courageous actions in taking the second step, which is as we move those certain amount of appropriated funds that are necessary to fight fire into the disaster fund, the temptation will be is to lower the overall budget of those agencies. It is critically important, and you all have the ability to keep those funds there and prioritize them into the programs that will help us address the conditions that are leading to these catastrophic wildfires across the country. Communities desperately need us to get accelerated in a way that we've yet seen in restoring these systems. Catastrophic wildfire, particularly rural and even urban environments, as you know in California, is, besides life-threatening, altering people's lives with their property, it is detrimental to communities in ways most folks don't know, between the subsequent flooding, impacts transportation system, the infrastructure of communities. And so it's critically important that you find a way to continue to increase and emphasize those related programs such as IRR, land ownership management, road systems. Those are the things that facilitate people being able to do the restoration work that's necessary. So often now in this country, I think because of all the other problems we face, we take for granted the natural landscapes that we have that have helped make our country great. So I just wanted to read one more thing to you in closing. That I normally don't read stuff, but this was just so good I had to do it. A really wise man around conservation said, "The conservation of our natural resources and their proper use constitute the fundamental problem which underlies almost every problem of our national life." That was Theodore Roosevelt. Now, of course, the interaction in a global environment between natural resources is way different than that time, but I still believe that the health of these lands are critically important to the health of our country, to our citizens, to our security. Natural resources still underpin so much of our wealth. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chairman Calvert, Ranking Member McCollum, Representative Simpson, and I am John McKenna. I am the president of the Recreational Aviation Foundation with members in all 50 states. I'll use the axiom of a former governor of our state who said, "Be on time, be brief, and be gone." So I'll thank you for the past support that this body has given to our efforts to preserve the recreational aviation assets that have been a part of the American landscape for nearly 100 years. These airstrips, many of which were built by the Forest Service and BLM in the early 1900s, were put in to accommodate the needs of the agencies themselves and the entities which they were involved with. Trails were built, telephone lines were hung, fires were fought, people were rescued, and supplies were replenished, all with aircraft in the backcountry of the United States. In short, aviation helped facilitate the building much of what we know now to be the trail systems and infrastructure that exists on our public lands. In the 50s and the 60s, many of the public landscapes underwent land planning processes. This period of time also saw the addition of wilderness designations to places such as Montana and Representative Simpson's state of Idaho, where a great number of airstrips in the backcountry existed and some cases still do. Unfortunately, at that same time, aviation, as we know it today, was not a prevalent voice at the planning meetings. Much of what existed was left to be closed either through neglect or administrative action. The late 70s, however, through now, has seen a strong rebirth of aviation as a form of recreational access to our public lands. In fact, the type of aviation I'm speaking of today is one of the most dynamic segments within the aviation industry. These airstrips are merely internal trailheads or points of access to public lands. By comparison to the trails and road systems on Forest Service and BLM lands, all airstrip combined are but a postage stamp on the landscape compared to the 157,000 miles of trails on Forest Service lands alone. These airstrips are a vital resource for firefighting as well as search and rescue. Unlike other recreational users of the forest, aircraft are seldom seen or heard. While motorhomes and RVs are visible to our nation's highways, aircraft are rarely noticeable to the common traveler. We like to say that aviation is the only mode that requires no road.
Yet pilots and their passengers are not only viable users of the forest, but a large economic driver to the surrounding communities. A 2008 study in Idaho showed that of the 1.4 million visitors who arrived in that state via the study airports, many of which are the airstrips we speak, more than 400,000 arrived via general aviation aircraft. Here's the dilemma. The aviation community has had to work very hard to both be recognized as a current legitimate user of our public lands, and second, we have had to work with little or no dedicated resources on behalf of our land managers. We understand that the very tight operational budgets of the agency and support the model of partnering as a way to leverage our mutual efforts, including the permanent passage of things such as FLRIA. We also support Senator Simpson's HB 167 in a very strong way. The aviation community has had to largely support through volunteer labor and dollars the upkeep and maintenance of these public assets. However, we often find that the agencies cannot even find dollars to assist through cost-sharing arrangements or to provide for volunteer training as it pertains to aviation assets. Collaboration through public-private partnerships has become the way to get things done, but without sufficient assets or funding, we just often watch as these things deteriorate. Through the urging of Congress and a partnership with the Recreational Aviation Foundation, we now have a formal inventory of airstrips on public lands. There are over 105 such known facilities on Forest Service lands alone. Although not a part of this committee's direct work, the RAF has had a signed agreement to do the needed maintenance of 3 airstrips in the National Park System in Death Valley, once again with an all-volunteer process. Across the country in locations such as Montana, Idaho, Utah, Colorado, California, and others, the story is the same. The pilot community has stepped up and taken care of the places that we enjoy. We plan to continue that effort. So in my day job as a life insurance agent, there becomes a time when you have to ask the prospect to buy, so I guess now's as good a time as any. The aviation community has shouldered the effort to keep these facilities safe, usable, and enjoyable. Our public partners have done what they could, but in most cases have to simply say we don't have resources to help. We understand the shortage of revenue. We particularly value not overspending, but we are here to ask you to help us help our partners. Can we find a way to put some dollars into the budget of the Forest Service and the BLM that can be directed at these important facilities? A little bit of money would go a very long way, and you can count on us, the aviation community, to carry our share of the load. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. I used to sell life insurance myself a long, long time ago. Obviously, the impact of wildfire, I think that was probably the most popular issue here today, is with almost all of our folks that are testifying on the forests, and obviously we need to help, and I hope you can help us get co-sponsors on Mike's bill, because we want to move this as quickly as possible. And I noticed you quoted a great Republican president, Theodore Roosevelt, and we appreciate that too. And aviation, my good friend, my neighbor in my office, Colin Peterson, of course, great aviator, flies all over Minnesota, so you know, I'm sure he's hit some of those runways on occasion.
I'm going to ask him.
Yeah, so have you flown with Colin?
No. No, I haven't been asked, but I've flown with Steve Adill from Minnesota, from Voyagers National Park.
And I used to be a pilot myself, and I used to take my little Cessna 150 all around and land it in these little teeny runways. Of course, I was like 19, 20 years old, somewhat suicidal, but I made through. I got it through it. So that's a miracle in itself. With that, Ms. McCullough, do you have any questions?
No, but if you go off for flight hours, you can leave me behind.
Okay, Mike?
No, just thank you for both being here. And when I was a pilot like Ken, I liked having those, knowing where those landing strips were, because you fly across some country that is pretty vast and pretty mountainous, and if something happens, I want to know that there's a landing strip somewhere around, so I used to look for all of them along the way. But I'm just curious, how the heck do you become a backcountry pilot and a life insurance salesman both? That seems just a little inconsistent, doesn't it?
I started one before the other.
Okay. Thank you both for being
and
here.
I recognize Representative Calvert being smart. He quit both being a life insurance agent and a pilot.
But if you're going to be flying airplanes in the West, you need to have life insurance.
Well, I know.
I know a guy.
Thank you.
We appreciate your testimony. Thank you very much. Adjourned, excuse me.
Adjourned.
We're adjourned. Oh, God.
Yeah, did you? I think you heard my name. Oh, yeah. So how was your travel? Oh, good. So, yeah, we've got Arizona. We've got Grapevine running. We have 25 aircraft. Alaska, all over the country. Yeah.